Heck yeah. All right. Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. Uh, we are likely to have a couple of new friends this time, so great to see you, whoever you may be. I'm very much hoping that you're going to enjoy this first little stint in my channel. I'm going to quickly post the live link everywhere, but before I do, it's very important that I introduce our fantastic guest today, a mod maker whose mod has kind of transcended the game of its origin, and that I think is one of the most impressive creations that has ever been made in an RTS map editor. I'd say in the league of Dota and similar. Uh, would you mind giving a quick overview of yourself, my friend?
So my name is Pronogo. My ID is Pronogo. My name is Darian. My time spent in RTS and modding has always been with the idea of eventually making something way more in the realm of its own game, its own experience, but I certainly lacked the expertise to do that, and so picked up modding as sort of just initially an inquisitive hobby, I guess you could say.
Mm.
But with regards to what I'm doing on the day-to-day now, I am behind Cosmonarchy, which is this very large-scale overhaul of StarCraft 1. And when I introduce it to people, it really does depend on how familiar they are with modding or how familiar they are with even StarCraft 1 itself. A lot of the times I like to call it a new game made in StarCraft 1's engine.
Yeah.
But the engine is not open source, so it's not really the same thing as saying, "Oh yeah, I made this in Unity or Unreal." It's definitely a different sort of story. And I do also want to take a bit of a disclaimer at the start to say that I didn't do it myself, even though a lot of this started off with me pushing in a direction initially by myself. It was sort of like enough people saw, hey, look at that guy over there. He's kind of funny looking. What's he doing? And then sort of piled in to help me push in the same direction.
Mm.
And along the way, we maybe, like, I'm imagining a big boulder Sisyphean style. And then instead of always going in a straight line, sometimes we kind of swerved over here to the left and
Yeah.
then over here to the right. And explored all these different avenues along this Sisyphean task. And I don't even know if it's necessarily uphill. It feels uphill when you're dealing with a closed source environment, but maybe it's a bit more of a flat road that we're traveling on right now. Just to say that it's not so difficult all the time.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been quite a journey. I was reflecting a lot on the history of the project because that's one of the things that you and I had talked about prior to this stream, and it does feel weird and surreal to be in the state that we're in now. And it has felt weird and surreal several times before. Like, there were times when maybe a few years into development for what Cosmonarchy used to be called, which is Project Hydra, when we started to actually do a lot of tech tree changes, for example, we had this concept of a tournament, a professional style tournament, because we all watched
Yep.
ASL in StarCraft 1, or even before that, the other Star Leagues. We all watched, Counter-Strike tournaments, for example, things like that. And so we were well aware of esports and very
Oh yeah,
interested
of
in the
course.
idea. And so the joke, if you will, it was a joke in many respects, was, oh yeah, we're gonna have a Cosmonarchy tournament one day. And now that's just a regular expected thing. It's slingshotted so far beyond just we have these sometimes to it would be weird to not have them now. And that's a surreal realization. But along the way, there have been several moments where I've had to be like, yeah, okay, I guess this is actually really happening right now. And went from, I was telling you earlier that I got to do some Counter-Strike casting later today. It's gone from a thing that, like, I used to do predominantly Counter-Strike casting or other esport casting. Now I do predominantly Cosmonarchy casting, which is
Mm.
funny to say. It doesn't pay the same, but that's okay. It's all about the passion, really, for this project. In fact, if we're, one of the things that I'm sure we'll end up covering at some point here is the concept of the thought process being, okay, what are you going to do with this mod? How are you going to turn it into a game? How can it be self-sustainable? That's a thought process that I've also come back on. And it really just comes down to the fact that this has been going on for so many years and developing in so many ways. And it's developed into the state now where, a lot of people are playing it, professional players are playing it. I think it was the right choice to stick with it after all these years. So if you can
Hmm.
afford to do that, if you're out there on your own sort of journey with regards to modding, it's definitely something that you might think about. Is like, wait, how far can we push this one thing then
Yeah,
exactly? So
that's
just some
pretty
more
much
thoughts.
exactly why I reached out to you, frankly. Besides the fact that I think your work is very impressive, my
Appreciate
channel
that.
is overwhelmingly focused on the Age franchise. Age of Empires, Age of Mythology, particularly Age of Empires 2. And this will be pretty much the second time I've ever predominantly, well, maybe third or fourth, but very minor degrees every time. Time that I've shouted or spotlighted a game that is not in the Age franchise, and yet I think it's extremely important that we in the Age franchise take lessons from Cosmonarchy and use it as a template to see what we can do with our own mods, with our own modding community, and as a general spotlight not only of why mods are so important, but from the kind of the cycle of mod to game, and what that looks like. This is going to be like one of the wildly dorkiest references I've ever made.
Okay.
Did you get into Bionicle growing up?
I think the extent of my Bionicle knowledge is from there was a Bionicle Legends game or something like that.
There's
that my
this
brother
line.
played when he was younger. So, okay,
there's this
tell me.
line of Matoran to Toa to Turaga.
Okay.
Anyone who knows Bionicle will know what I'm talking about. That I think about in regards to mod making, right? The mod goes from like weird little hobby thing to wildly dominant mod to an independent game. And then maybe births its own mods in so doing.
Yes, right.
We're kind of seeing that with Dota 2 right now, where some Dota 2 mods are getting reasonably prominent. So just to give my kind of normal spiel, hello, good to see you, everyone, new and old alike. Obviously, please do jump into chat. We're going to take whatever breaks we can during to look up and see what people are saying in chat. I'd love to hear your thoughts and input. Obviously, this is a rather unconventional stream for me. We're going to be focused on this kind of interview format the entire time rather than just half the time, because frankly, we got a lot to talk about today. All I will say is I am not red. Thank you very much for bumping in. Finally, this mod is getting the attention it deserves. Yes, I agree. Although, frankly, we are YouTubers of comparable size, so I can't say it's like a massive bump, but it deserves more. And Ryan Sembrana says, Cosmonarchy Brood War gaining further attraction, influence is spreading at a greater pace. This is right. I agree. And then Mad Matt says, just in time. Good to see you, bud. Given that all this will be recorded, of course, people will be able to see all of it in post. And so let's just dive into the stuff. And as people filter into chat, we can see what they are saying as well. Could you give me a very brief summary of what is Cosmonarchy and what distinguishes it from Brood War, and cycle from that into a brief history of Cosmonarchy?
Surely. So Cosmonarchy by itself, the sort of reason for its existence, the raison d'etre, if I can practice my rusty French, is the concept behind it is basically, what if we just took everything that limits scale, we either removed it, made it less limited, bumped it up a notch. And so we have, for example, if you compare it to StarCraft 1, got rid of supply. That's no longer a feature at all in the whole game. We've got rid of sequential upgrades and standalone upgrades, which that means like weapon and armor upgrades, which are sequential. You get up to 3 of them in a normal game. And then standalone upgrades are like siege mode research or stim pack research or marine range research, things like that.
So your guys just do everything from base.
Correct, yeah. So the thought process was whatever the stats are of the unit, that's something that should be a constant. And if we did decide to go into upgrades, we would want to make sure we have some kind of visual read for that, because that's one of the key issues with upgrades as they are.
Yeah,
is
like
that
the shields you get in StarCraft 2, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's no visual indication for a lot of sequential upgrades, for example. There's not like any hue changing or anything like that for when the weapons are different. However, you do frequently get into situations where the bottom line of the sort of shift away from upgrades and the shift away from supply is obviously that's going to affect pacing. That's going to affect how powerful your army is, how big it is at a certain time. And so you do risk losing a little bit of the early game. And so we have to make some adjustments based on that. It also makes a big change to your what you're focusing on. Like supply is another rote task that you're doing very frequently, going back home and building a depot or a pylon, or I guess Zerger a little bit easier because you could just hockey a hatchery somewhere and then make an overlord. But bottom line is you don't have to do that anymore. And so that's one less reason to look at your base, one less reason to task away from whatever other task you might be doing. Sort of diminishes the overall pool of things that you have to, you could say, tasks to do, which I'm sort of presenting as a negative right now. I do think it ended up being positive.
Mm.
It allowed you to spend a little bit more time on impactful and interesting decision making that's about leveraging the things that you've already secured. So if you take away supply, it means that you can make more armies. It means you can staff your bases with, defensive units and not just static defense structures.
Mm.
If you're worried about a run by, if you're worried about some kind of harassment angle, if you just want to cover the map in, a couple of small units here and there, and they're not going to be too consequential for the major fights, but they're still going to be giving you advance warning on enemy army movements, that kind of thing. These are things that you are more capable of doing, also more capable of taking a lot of bases on the map. So another thing that we changed is that minerals don't deplete. That means that you have, they get to a depleted state where they provide less resources, but they don't ever evacuate completely. In the same way that Vespene originally in the original game didn't deplete, they just gave you less. That's basically something we've shifted over to minerals, and Vespene doesn't ever get to a depleted state. Wow. Instead, it's just always giving you the same thing. And that leads to interesting game states where at first Vespene is your bottleneck for tech. And at second, Vespene is ending up being more abundant. And so you start to shift into more Vespene heavy units in the very, very late game. And so with all that said, the response of to the changes tends to be bigger armies, more involvement there with regards to the changes. And I do feel like overall, the way that it has worked has been to make Cosmonarchy have more of an identity of having, earlier skirmishes with the early skirmishes are not necessarily at an earlier time, but they have bigger unit counts or they have more specialized unit counts. You'll get people teching up just a teensy bit quicker as Protoss because that's how the Protoss tech works completely differently. You'll get Terrans who are trying to min-max on a smaller number of units for a defense or absolutely output a ridiculous number of, say, bio units in the early game, but have a weaker economy behind it. And we're still developing all the balance and stuff, and it wasn't really intended as a 1v1 game anyway. It was more intended as an FFA or team game or campaign-style sandbox. But it ended up being something that people like to play in 1v1, and so we have balanced predominantly for that.
Absolutely.
You could say.
As a brief side along, by the way, I have a thing that I really wanted to touch upon, but also I wanted to briefly address chat to answer your question, Herr Lauder. Topic today is Cosmonarchy, a massive mod that overhauls StarCraft Brood War. Even though StarCraft is not something we normally talk about on this channel, we can learn a lot as Age of Empires players and modders from Cosmonarchy because it has transformed everything about it. Really everything. And something that you've talked about here is how you removed supply. Now, to the average person, obviously I want to get back into the overview and history for a moment, but just because I know this will come up. The average Age of Empires player, if you said to them, we're going to remove the 200 pop limit, the first response would be, oh, that's going to chug the game. And the second response would be, oh, that's going to become impossible to manage. Now, if I recall correctly, you guys managed to break the barrier on how many entities can exist in game at a single time.
Correct. Yeah.
Could you briefly talk about that and how there's too much to do and it will chug computers things have actually played out in practice?
StarCraft 1 is very performant, even on modern OSs where the OS takes up a lot of the performance barrier that you have. So it is not even a 64-bit application. If you exceed 4 gigabytes of RAM loaded, it will just close. So with that in mind, there is a hard limit to what we can do, but we don't even come close to that. I think we probably don't even cross 1 gigabyte of RAM usage right now. And that's RAM is the original StarCraft systems are completely different with that.
Sure.
So very performant, very low spec. We have seen some issues with CPU bottlenecking, but that's and it is a CPU drawn game, by the way. There's no GPU usage in StarCraft 1.
Wow.
So we have seen CPU bottlenecking, but not from drawing assets. It's from pathfinding, and that's something that in theory we can improve in the future. But that really only happens when units get stuck. So if units are moving through an open battlefield, there's no problem at the max unit limit.
What is the unit limit just for?
Little over 4,000, 4,095. Yeah. So you can have an FFA with 8 players. 8 is our player limit. You can have all 8 players at, I don't know, how you divide. I guess it would be 500 units per each or something like that. And that does include structures. So it is possible to reach that limit, but it's pretty unlikely. So yeah, the thought process behind the tech there, I guess you could say, is it was never a question of CPU usage. It was always a question of, can we reverse engineer enough code to make it so that the unit limit
Yeah, yeah,
isn't a
yeah.
problem?
How about like
And so,
human manageability? Because that's something that I hear constantly is, oh, that's completely impractical when you're talking about removing those sort of barriers.
all right, all right. So I feel like the biggest issue with regards to the human manageability side comes from the way that the oh, give me one moment here.
Yeah, yeah,
Sorry about
totally. You
this.
you got a quick message. While I'm doing so, I will again say for everyone who is joining, thank you so much for taking the time. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, especially for Pronogo, fire them away in chat. I would love to see them. I will be regularly reading chat. We have a ton to go through. Normally, I come into these streams with like 3 bullet points, and I got this for my notes today. So there's a lot to ask about. Pedro say I didn't see the extent of the total overhaul of Cosmonarchy beyond very, very little I see on YouTube. All seem very interesting. We'll get into a little bit of that pretty soon. uh, oh, and Ryan says Goliath and Drakiden pathfinding repaired.
Oh
Which way
yes,
would be
yeah.
the best to download and test? I'm absolutely certain that Protogo has a good link for me there. You want to throw me
Yeah,
the best link for
yeah.
some people who want to get into it?
Yep, absolutely. So if you just go to cosmonarchy.com, there's a website for it.
Perfect.
It's got some fancy flavoring on it, but the biggest thing that you need to worry about is just that little down arrow with the line underneath it, the download link at the top right. You can also pop into our Discord server if you're interested. We have a very
Yeah.
active community,
Would you mind
almost
throwing me a
getting to
link to
that
that?
1,000 users. Oh yeah, I can do
Yeah,
that.
please. Yeah,
Uh,
send me an infinite link to that, and I'll just stick it in the video description as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um,
Same. Like it's funny you say infinite link. I feel very strongly about an infinite link here. I have not changed this link since I opened the server, like maybe 7 years ago.
oh
So
hell yeah!
it's the only
Fulgurating.
link that's ever existed.
That's
So.
awesome. Fulgurating Bean says just joined. So sorry if the question has already been asked. But this is the mod for the old StarCraft or the modern remastered version?
Oh, good question. So we were talking about technicals. We were talking about GPU usage. Remaster does use the GPU. So on a technical level, we don't support the remaster. We didn't build in the remaster because it changes every time it's updated. It will change some memory addresses around, and memory addresses are how, in a reverse engineer closed source environment, memory hacking environment, you have to change the game or modify the game.
Yep.
And
Same with Age of
so
Empires.
right, and so in that kind of environment, if the game changes its memory addresses, it will break support for mods
Yep.
almost assuredly. It doesn't necessarily have to be every single update. It doesn't necessarily have to be every single feature of mod support, but every update has a chance to do that. So the reason why we decided to stick with the old game is it's already had like a decade and a half or so of mod support built in.
Mm.
Tools designed to work with formats from the original, things like that. We don't have to use there's different extensions for the remastered files that eventually somebody did develop. In fact, I got to shout out the user Naive, Neiv. One Swedish guy on the internet decided he would break Blizzard's Warden so that anti-cheat wasn't involved for modding, and also develop tools for editing the remastered graphics, which obviously didn't exist because the remastered graphics format is different, and a couple of other details related to remastered modding. But I think he's since become inactive, or at least less active, and he's the only one who can update the mod launcher for remastered. So if they ever get another update, which to Blizzard's credit, they have not updated the game in a very long time. So thank you, Blizzard. Back to how it was before the remaster, I guess. But if that ever does happen, that mod is all the mods that were made in remastered are gone. So I took the liberty of, after dabbling in remastered modding for Project Hydra, which is what Cosmonarchy used to be called when it was just a campaign mod, basically. I took the liberty of making that inside remastered, just to see, okay, let me try that. It's going to be a co-op campaign. It'll have custom AI. It won't have custom graphics because we couldn't do that at the time. There were no tools for modding the remastered graphics. I couldn't even really... there's this little trick that you do with some units where the team color spots, which are magenta on the graphic in the graphical files, and then the game repalettes them into whatever the player's color is. I took the liberty of doing a bunch of changes to that in previous mods where I would hard code the player color to something I wanted. So heroes would always be colored a certain color because there would be this very common problem in anybody who remembers the sort of design language of StarCraft 1's campaigns, heroes were teal.
Yep.
They were always teal. There was a trick that they did by making a rescuable player teal, but if you just spawned a Jim Raynor Marine, he wouldn't be teal by default. He would be whatever color the player who spawned him for was. So I decided I would not have that same problem in other contexts, and I would just go ahead and basically overwrite the player color by editing the graphic. You can also do this in code, which I didn't find out until later, but you can't do that in the remaster. You could now probably, but you can't do it. You couldn't do it when I was still working within it. I couldn't even figure out how to make it so that Jim Raynor's vulture was teal instead of whatever color he wanted. So that's the level of like kind of regression that we had in the modding space, even when I was still working in it. And then when it kept breaking, I was like, okay, I'm going back to 161, which is the old version before the remaster. I'm going to go ahead and backport this game in there, and that did at the time hurt because the Project Hydra maps, some of them required like the unit limit that we were just talking about, the entity limit, to be raised, and at that time we didn't have the technology to do that within 161, and remastered was doubling it. Now it used to be 1700, so we have almost 3x'd it, so we've actually eclipsed the remastered entity limit, which is kind of funny to me. I will never not think it's amusing when we end up having like a better feature than remastered, because we are just dudes on the internet, you know what I mean? So but I don't think it's that controversial to say that a lot of remasters these days are not good. However, they were especially not good for modding, and I know that from my cursory understanding of Age of Empires, I know that that's also a problem in Age. But generally speaking, like if you can find a version freeze, that will guarantee you stability from
Bingo.
Anytime, anywhere. And so if you're, especially if it's a mod that doesn't require multiplayer components, I would definitely almost always advocate for that. If it's a mod that requires multiplayer components and you can get it working on a version freeze, even if it's kind of annoying. Listen, we used to play Cosmonarchy. This is my story of like walking uphill in the snow both ways. We used to play Cosmonarchy on a LAN emulator that was like a weird discount Hamachi. It's called Radmin. I think the company was based in India. I'm not sure. There's a little suspicious when I tried to look into it. We used to run that for peer-to-peer connection games, and we used to just pop into the LAN settings in there, and that's how we played Cosmonarchy, co-op maps or whatever, back before it was even necessarily called Cosmonarchy. That's how we played Project Hydra back in the day. We ran that, and so people who are really interested in your project will do those kinds of things.
Yep.
Yes, it will be another hoop to jump through, but I find it, generally speaking, if you jump through hoops, it's because you want to do the thing. If you give up after the first hurdle, you probably would do that even after when we have like this really robust launcher that downloads the program and tells Windows Defender to stop deleting it and do all this other fun stuff. So now we've got all this fancy new tech. Now we've got something called CrownLink, which is our peer-to-peer networking solution that exclusively operates on the ports that StarCraft 1 needs for maximum security.
That's so crazy, dude. That's
and
wild.
that's, by the way, that was done by some guy named Jesse. Shout out Jesse. Some guy who was like, I like this project, but Radman seems really suspicious. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right about that, but we haven't found a better alternative despite looking. And he's like, hold my beer, I'll make one.
That's so cool.
That's the way that happened. And that's honestly the story that you're going to get when you're trying it. So even if it's like, I really don't like this situation, I'm toiling in this situation for however long, eventually you stop toiling in that situation, either by your own work or somebody else's.
So a bunch of things, just to quickly weigh in on all that. First of all, I just put out a video talking about mod instability in Age of Empires. Okay. It's very topical. Mods get murdered by every game update. And frankly, even though DE has given a lot of great tools, it has also to some degree restricted some amounts of flexibility, which we had in older versions of the game. So honestly, I'd say that Age of Empires DE is like one of the best remasters out there, probably. Okay. I'm pissed that I have to buy the game for a third fucking time, but it's like
it just works. Todd Howard.
Yeah, it has pros and cons, but the biggest con is mods getting murdered by updates. Now the other thing that I also wanted to briefly mention, actually, chat first. Pedro, just two questions from some of my audience. Pedro says, I know StarCraft 2 is another beast, but I have to ask, any plans to port to any degree as best as possible? Obviously, the mod for StarCraft 2, and if not, why? Fulgurating Bean also adds, how could one get tools for modding the old StarCraft? I've been trying for years, but never could. I'll also add to that, for someone who wants to play Cosmonarchy and doesn't have Brood War on disc, how the fuck do they do that?
Okay, so When the remaster came out, StarCraft became essentially freeware. You only pay for the skin pack and the matchmaking experience. That's what you pay for when you buy the remaster. But the actual game itself is free. It's freely distributed by Blizzard. Therefore, we freely distribute the old version of the game with Fraud Launcher. Basically, what happens is you download Fraud Launcher.
That's so cool.
The steps of the launcher are that you decide where to install it, and then it first downloads a lightweight version of StarCraft, which does not have the original campaigns, the original maps. It just has like the MPQs, which are the data files for the game's logic and art, and so the original art that we don't modify. Those cases, you can basically think of StarCraft as a dependency for Cosmonarchy, so it downloads and installs that. Then it's going to modify your registry a little bit so that it knows where to look for the old version of StarCraft. The remaster uses different registries, helpfully, so we don't need to worry about that as much. Step 2 is to actually start cloning the Git repository we have for Cosmonarchy itself, all the data we use, all of the plugins and stuff that we have. And when that happens, you're basically never going to interface directly with 1.16.1, which is the old version of StarCraft. This also, it's worth noting, does create a separate installation of StarCraft, even if you have a 1.16.1 or remastered installation already on your computer. And the reason for that is we wanted to make sure our dependency of, Cosmonarchy's StarCraft copy was untouched. If you are an enthusiast or a modder who already does that kind of stuff for the old version, you can still have your workspace, and it will be separate from Cosmonarchy's. And that was important too, because we're modders, and so we didn't know this at the time, that there wouldn't really be a chance that we would start making a new mod because we have Cosmonarchy, and so why would you make a new mod? We've done all this other work. But if you're out there trying to make a much more lightweight sort of thing, or just starting on your own thing within StarCraft 1, Cosmonarchy won't affect any of that. The worst thing that you might run into is it's pointing to that version that directory by default for some of the modding tools, and you can update those in your settings there. And so that really shouldn't be more than a one-time issue.
Yeah. So you're saying that literally by downloading Cosmonarchy, you get everything you need to actually play it, including a free version of it. It
downloads that. The last step is the maps and Crown Link, which is what I said earlier for our networking. So basically, it is a one-click install if everything goes well. The asterisk is, certain antiviruses will see it as a virus or a Trojan. The main reason for that is because you have to inject code at runtime in order to get the plugin changes in, and also, some antivirus configurations will see that Fraud Launcher tries to give itself or the install path of Cosmonarchy just the install path and not anything else in it. We were pretty diligent about this. It gives itself a Windows Defender exception, which is, of course, an antivirus concern. That's because most garden variety Windows installations just care about what's present on your PC already. They don't trip over that. There are some more advanced configurations where that will trip. And you'll just have to trust that the Discord server with almost 1,000 people and the constant tournaments and stuff aren't trying to mine Bitcoin from your PC.
And I'm sure that you guys would be able to offer support on the Discord for that as well to some degree.
And you could reach out via email. You could do YouTube comments. I've done all sorts of that stuff like that.
That's marvelous.
To linger a little bit on the technical note, the antivirus issue does often come up, and I often enough that I know I almost have a prepared response, which is just we open source our code, so you can also check the code if you care about that. These are all kind of social proofs. I can't point to I haven't engaged in the mafia shakedown business of paying $2,000 to sign my executable that they don't trip on it, which is all you would have to do, by the way. It's just a money thing. So I haven't built up enough capital to where that's a minuscule permission. And I am the adversarial type of character to be actually, no, I don't think I'm ever going to give you guys money, even if I was rolling in it. And maybe that would be different when I was actually rolling in it. But I'm just I do have that kind of, grudge holding mentality for companies for whatever reason. I'm still shaking my fist at a couple of companies to this day. So anyway, that's one of them. The little consortium that tries to get you to pay up for signed executable so that you don't trip antiviruses. They don't do any real due diligence research half the time. There have been actual viruses that have been signed. So that's just one of those things that you got to hopefully trust us with. Now, there were two other questions with this.
Yeah, there was how to find tools from modding old StarCraft and any plans to port in any way to StarCraft 2.
Thank you for the refresher. So, StarCraft 2 port question first. StarCraft 2 is less performant than StarCraft 1, and it has less mod support than StarCraft 1, even though it has a more complicated editor. So, the things we do in Cosmonarchy are impossible in StarCraft 2. I know that sounds wild because it's an older game, but the things that we do on a technical level, if you tried to reproduce the Terran Ancial, which is a shielding unit, basically it's this flyer unit. It does detection for the Terrans. It's available at tier 1. It's pretty gas intensive. Projects the shield around it. Any projectile that enters that shield will be redirected to the Ancial as long as the Ancial still has energy.
Whoa, that's so
and
sick. What a cool unit.
you can't do that in StarCraft 2 because projectiles don't exist in the same manipulatable way as entities as in StarCraft 1. So that's just one example off the dome that like a couple of dedicated StarCraft 2, content developers have said, I've been trying to reproduce your units in StarCraft 2, and these are the ones that don't work properly. Or like, these are ones I had to implement in a funky way because I had to make some concession because the engine didn't perform properly with this check or something. And it's possible that they just overlooked something. I will, however, trust them take them at their word because I am not a StarCraft 2 modding expert. But based on just those little testimonials and also the fact that more fundamentally, the game doesn't run. If you have 4,000 units in StarCraft 2, you will not see much more than a slideshow on even top of the line computers. It's not a well-processed game. It's not like the game itself has most of its functions being done on one core, which isn't really going to work out too well if you have these complicated 3D pathfindings. Another issue, of course, being the graphics usage from the fact that it is 3D. And then here comes the more firebrand take. I don't like StarCraft 2. There you go. That's why we're not doing. That's the most important reason. I think StarCraft 2 was like a quarter of the game StarCraft 1 was, and I don't necessarily think StarCraft 1 is all that great. But I do think it's still the best released RTS game, considering Cosmonarchy is technically just a mod. I can't say that my pet project here is the best RTS game. But I will say I play it very frequently. I think it's the best RTS experience. A lot of that's going to be to taste. But to my taste, StarCraft 1 was better, so we stuck with that.
I mean, we talked a bit about StarCraft 2 and how, like, I, as a much more casual player, I really liked Wings of Liberty's campaign. I kind of liked Heart of the Swarm's campaign. Legacy of Void made me hate everything, and then Widow Mines ruined competitive for me. So like it was, I am firmly in the let's stop touching it, please category. Although I will say I still am very fond of the Wings of Liberty campaign. It was a good storytelling experience. Although, speaking of storytelling, looping all the way the hell back to the kind of history of Cosmonarchy, we'll briefly go through. Project Hydra, Cosmonarchy's origin, started as a campaign overhaul. Tell me about, because we had a fun conversation about that the other day. Besides the fact that it was a pure co-op campaign, which I love the idea of. Co-op campaigns are the frickin' future, man. Tell me a bit about why you started doing this campaign overwrite, in the way you told me the other day, because it was very funny. And then we can move into how it evolved into Cosmonarchy.
Yep. To briefly, because it's a very brief answer, the modding support one, if you go to fraudsclub.com/StarCraft, you will get access to a whole bunch of modding resources that we put there. If you're looking for tools, they should be mostly up to date. If you have questions, just at me on whatever. It'll be fine. To that one person who was looking for modding support, the resources are out there, but I guess in these days you probably can't find them on Google or anything.
They might be peer-to-peer,
Yeah. So when it comes to Project Hydra's origins, Project Hydra was like the original. I do very basic code names for projects sometimes, and it was just Co-op 2017. That's what I had initially called it, because in 2017 I started a project where I was going to co-op overhaul the original campaigns. And Project Hydra made sense because, well, we took this one thing and we made it two, and it's like, oh yeah, they tried to cut off my head and now I have two. Isn't that a funny Fallout reference or something? But the way that Hydra started off was Rebel Yell, the original Terran campaign. I decided that, like, okay, let me rewind a little bit more. When you're talking about StarCraft or any game, any RTS game that I have experienced, and I will say that the Age of Empires games do qualify under this umbrella, but I haven't played every Age of Empires campaign, and it was a while ago, and I don't remember most of it. So I will just say my experience with RTS campaigns is almost uniquely and uniformly horrible. For someone who's looking for something that is... It doesn't have to be a grievous challenge, but just a more serious experience. And I don't even care if it's a funny, like, premise for a mission. There was this one really funny RTS game, and funny by concept. I couldn't understand any of the dialogue because it was all in Korean. But it was Vital Device, and the whole premise of it is that you're inside a human body, and that's like your bit. And so like there's some weird looking things in there. There was another one that was called Chaos. There's another Korean RTS game that's like I don't even think it ever exited like beta, but people still will sometimes like do some games on it. That one looks really weird and wild. I remember looking at that back in the day before we had like 3D modelers on the not the payroll but the team. And back in the day, and I was like, oh man, maybe we could steal some graphics from them. Maybe that would work out well. Like I see something that could be a Zerg unit, and it's like a fantasy game with dinosaurs and shit. So, all right, like Jurassic War, which is actually I forget what the original Korean name is for it, but Jurassic War 2, another classic, RTS game from way back that most people aren't going to have heard of. But, like they've got some legendary lines. Like there were moments of genuine laughter from playing these games, but it didn't devalue the experience. What devalues the experience is the enemy starts off with the entire map under their control. They have 200 supply maxed out or sometimes over the supply limit pre-placed for them. And if they just decided to select like half of their units and send them at you, you would die and there'd be no hope and it would be a useless mission. But they don't do that. And then you win and you're like, wait, did I win or did the enemy lose? Like there is a pretty big distinction between that. And I thought it isn't that hard to make something better than this. But my run-ins with other content developers kept telling me that people were entirely thinking about that the other way. They were thinking, no way. I couldn't possibly make something as good as Blizzard made. I hope that I can make something that's half as good as what Blizzard made. And that's what they were like, their mindset was like, can I make something maybe a quarter as good to start and then improve? And I set out to basically prove that like it would be very easy to take even Blizzard content and repurpose it, retrofit it into something that's like these lessons have been here. It's not that they're the modern age lessons necessarily, but you could think of them as like an update for the modern age to indicate how far we could have come or how far we have come from a design standpoint. And so that's where I decided the best way to experience this would be with a friend. So I'm going to make it what I call co-optional. If you don't have a friend you're playing it in single player, then an AI controls the other guy, which is similar to Red Alert 3's campaign, for example. And so there's this idea that you're coming in and you're starting with less than the whole map taken up by the enemy. You have an early game. You start off with less pre-placed units yourself sometimes. But the bottom line is like there's expansions and you're expected to take them. And there's avenues of the map that you're going to want to try to learn and hold, and you probably have to retry a few times. And you might need to scout in advance because you're going to get taken out by a big attack if you don't, and you got to know to prepare for that. And it's not even like the same thing happens the same time. Some more modern RTS games have this, and I think StarCraft 1 actually did have variants to it in a higher degree in the campaign because they would have sometimes they would have random weights in their AI scripts, and other times they would just decide for whatever reason in the map state to take a different attack path based on their programming for not on the per map level, but just on how the AI functions with attack waves. They just did that in a different way sometimes. So these were all reasons why we decided to go for something a lot more focused on like true knowledge testing, true skill testing, I guess you could say. We tried to not have it be, well, I guess it was mostly just a me thing. I had some help on the technical side. But at this stage, when I was doing the mapping and stuff, it was all me. And I tried to make sure that it wasn't a bunch of like puzzles or something like that, where it's like, as soon as I know the solution, I can pass through. Like RTS is about execution. It's about having a good, sound, fundamental approach to the game and being able to execute well on that. Not so it's combining the strategy and the real time aspects. That was how I envisioned it. And so my thought was, let's have a co-opable like co-op thing. Sometimes you'll be together like close enough to help each other. Sometimes you'll be separated, and the first task will be to link up your bases and stuff so that you can help each other and not be isolated by the enemy. For example, the mission NORAD 2, which is when you have to save Edmund Duke from his crashed battlecruiser in the middle of the map, that was retrofitted as a specific example. You have Raynor on one side and Kerrigan on the other, and they're surrounded by Zerg, and in the middle, of course, is surrounded by the most Zerg is Duke, but Duke has an actual AI script running, and it's kind of funky because it's not like a normal, it's a bit gimmicky in this respect, but Duke has the ability to train SCVs from his crashed battlecruiser, and he has like a font of money that he's got, and it never replenishes because he's not mining, but he's repairing his stuff, he's building up like a couple extra barracks, he's trying to garrison with bunkers and like defend himself, and he's actively trying to survive instead of being like units that you kind of sort of control because they're rescuable, but you can't leave the base with them because they're surrounded in like a Blizzard basically just set a no-go zone and said you can't go there. And I wanted to do something a little bit more involved with that mission, and that became one of the most notable missions from what people have told me, like testimonials from users. Basically, they were like, you know, this mission, Duke will really piss me off because he'll survive and he'll survive and he'll survive. And then he just falls over it. Like, and we were just about to get him. And I was like, yeah, you know, I sympathize with that because in some ways it's almost out of your control. I did take some precautions to tell, like if units wander out of the pit, I tell them to go back in and stuff, like things like that. So he doesn't just lose a bunch of stuff infinitely. And he never tries to attack. He will always be on the defensive unless there are some cases where he will try to attack. And that's when it's like, if he detects that there's like a big weakness on the platform above, he'll try to like chip in basically, so he's not just sitting there uselessly while he waits for you. So try to be somewhat intelligent, try to be somewhat cooperative. There were also a bunch of like the Antiguan, which is just like the name of the place, Antigua. So there was like Antiguan militia that were kind of scattered about they were allied to you in a sense. They were basically destined to die, but they served as a buffer so that you could see that the Zerg infestation was really deep here. And the Zerg would, instead of just starting off with that area of the map taken, they would have to take it, but it would be like a walkover, like they knew they could, and they would just expand to those bases. But it would give you like shared vision. It would give you some kind of intel about what was going on. It felt like a very living, breathing map and world in that particular map because you had the Antiguan rebels or whatever that were just kind of scattered about. You had Duke in the middle, so you had a shared vision of all of that. You had your co-op partner or AI if you were playing single player, and you were all trying to do the same sort of thing, which is survive the Zerg and get Duke out of there. And so everybody collaborating for a common goal. And then you had, I think, 2 or maybe 3 different Zergs. I can't remember how many. I think it was just 2. And oh man, I will admit I was a little bit gleeful when I would see like players play that mission. Though we had a lot of content creators like streaming it and stuff, and they would play that mission and then they'd think they didn't be in the clear, and then suddenly like the Zerg in the to the left side, Jimmy's side, Rayner's side would suddenly they'd have a bunch of Guardians attacking them from a high ground position, and I specifically scripted the AI to like attack from this location to that location with Guardians. And I knew like, oh, the time's getting close to like 12 minutes or whatever it was. They got to watch out for that. And like, oh, he didn't build any Wraiths. So he's going to have a hard time here because it's not like you had the Goliath range upgrade in StarCraft 1. Anyway, these are all details, but the bottom line is that's how Hydra started off. It was dead set on giving you this thing where if you scouted, you had good fundamentals, you had a good understanding of the army comp, and we did do some tech tree changes, but it wasn't massive like Cosmonarchy. There were no new units. It was just like upgrades. Like we didn't have medics because it wasn't Brood War. So there was an upgrade that like you could have out of combat healing with your bio, and it was a pretty expensive upgrade. I think it required the science facility, so it was like a tier 3 endgame upgrade. But you could make it from the academy, and it was basically like a stand-in for the fact that you had no medics, but it made bio more relevant in the late game and stuff like that. So it's like really minor things that still helped you have a more complex tech tree and fight for longer, because none of the campaign missions were really designed for super long gameplay. They were mostly designed to like kind of cap out 20-25 minutes. And so I wanted there to be an option for you to be able to do that. So yeah, that plus a lot of really souped up heroes, because I wasn't yet at the point where I realized losing a whole game, which is about making 1,000 dudes because you lost one dude, doesn't make any sense. That should never defeat you. Heroes are not supposed to just, oh, they died, game over. At that point, why? Like, just keep them in the mineral line. Even if they're really strong, keep them in the mineral line. I don't want to risk it. Especially in StarCraft 1. StarCraft 1 has so many, like, one-hit kill situations.
Yeah.
The AI is specifically coded to not use spawn broodling on heroes, which is funny to me. But other than that, I mean, you walk into an area where there's a bunch of static defense you didn't scout, and you happen to be scouting with your hero, dead. Like there's stuff like that happens all the time. Siege tanks are instant hit. You can't dodge them. In Cosmonarchy, that's not true, but in StarCraft 1, that is. And so there's all sorts of stuff like that to me that just felt very unfair. But at that time, I was like, well, I'll combat this by making heroes really useful, which actually had the opposite effect a lot of the times, where people would be like, I got to use this unit. It's so good, and then it would die. They'd die, yeah. And then they would be defeated. Yeah. I came up with this concept where you would have like Kerrigan would cloak, but for all players, and so even invisible to her own owner, like, or her team. When she took fatal damage, I thought about this. Like, maybe we could do something like that, and it would be like her ninja escaping or whatever. Like, I think Rayner as a Marine was supposed to put down like a smoke grenade, like an actual ninja, and disappear. I don't know how I was going to explain that. There was a point where Kerrigan was supposed to be in a Goliath as an alternative hero, and she was going to have like a
terribly sorry. I'm real quick. I got a knock at my door. Please carry on for the audience, because I've heard a chunk of this.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, the bottom line was that the main changes of the co-op campaign were entirely geared towards having a more robust experience than you could in the original game, And a lot of other co-op content also was just, let's run heavier AI, like higher AI scripts, higher difficulty AI scripts. Let's give the enemy more money. It was the opposite way. They tried to solve the problem of having like a co-opable experience and it being too easy in the original game if you just basically made the original game two-player. They tried to solve that. These modders tried to solve this by just increasing the amount of money they had, oftentimes running very fragile AI systems where they would break because they didn't really understand how it worked under the hood, and they weren't really doing any modding. It was just editing maps, which is a whole dichotomy of like, what is a mod? Well, most people just mean custom content when they say that. But in this case, they were just distributing a bunch of modified maps because they didn't want to distribute with a mod, since that means that you have to do one extra download before you play. And we were just talking about filters earlier with like,
Sure.
people play it on Radmin for Cosmonarchy. They'll download your mod. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
You will get the people who will do the one extra click. Great if you can avoid it or walk around it, but not a problem. But yeah, bottom line is I saw all of these developers saying, I can't do as good as Blizzard. I saw how bad Blizzard was in my estimation. I saw how easy it would be to make something better. And it did end up taking like the better part of half a year. So I wouldn't say it was like just an instantaneous switch or whatever. I was also learning like how to work with AI a little bit more deeply at that time for enemy AI. But I always have to say, no, I'm talking about game AI, like AI in a game.
Yeah,
It doesn't help.
exactly.
Yeah.
God
I think I
damn
told you
it.
this earlier. It doesn't help that our plugin is called GPTP, which is so close to Chat GPT.
Ah.
And everybody's like, oh, you use AI for the game? No.
No.
No, we don't.
No. So real quick, I have like a billion very specific questions to get into, but the last thing I wanted to get for our kind of overview of Cosmonarchy is the evolution of Hydra to Cosmonarchy, and at a summary, give an idea to my viewers of the scope of Cosmonarchy and just how much you have changed and just how much you have added.
All right, so we didn't change the names of the races. They're still Terran, Protoss, and Zerg. You still have a Nexus. We call it the Command Center a Ministry now. Still have a Hatch. We call it Hatcherosk, but you could still just abbreviate it as Hatch. Trying to think, what else did we not change? I mean, every unit is different.
You used a bunch of the same graphic assets.
That's true. That's true. We haven't replaced them all yet. We will eventually. We're actually got a vulture model in the works these days, which
cool.
Is pretty nice. I guess I could probably get you a screenshot of what its current version is at some point later.
Heck
but
yeah.
the idea that we had.
I'll show some
initially,
screenshots while you're talking, by the way. Carry on, please.
Fair enough. Yeah, the idea that I initially had was Cosmonarchy is supposed to be this. And Project Hydra before it was originally supposed to be this like sandbox for custom games like FFAs and team games and team FFAs, even like 2v2v2 or whatever. When it came to like the head-to-head player versus player, it was never meant to replace 1v1 for StarCraft 1. Like StarCraft 1 was seen as the premier 1v1. The fact that people now see it as an alternative is great. Not something that was originally the goal. And then when it came to the campaign style, that was a big focus initially. Obviously, it started off as a co-op campaign project. The content that we wanted to do and ended up ending like with a total lore rewrite. This is where I like flex my fan fiction muscle, I guess. I never wrote fan fiction in a traditional sense, but I don't think you could call it anything else. It's literally like we set ourselves an ambiguous amount of time and space away from the original campaign's events. And we basically pretend none of it ever happened, and we don't have any references to the original lore. Like there's no Overmind. We have a completely different Zerg command structure. So it really does feel like very different. Even the biology of some things is now like fan-conned, whatever you would say, changed, modified. So it does feel like it's a alternate universe in some ways from the original StarCraft, because I wasn't really that interested in like preserving some kind of ancestral link between the lore. I don't really like the lore of the original game very much. I think the set dressing and the way that they go about like presenting the game can be pretty convincing, can be pretty nice. When you dig into the ideas, it kind of falls apart for me. And I'm sure some people are going to have that reaction to my stuff. So I'm not even saying that I'm objectively a better writer or whatever. But I think I like my stuff better, and that's all that really mattered for me.
Of course, that's the most important thing as a game dev.
That's right. You were talking about like the sort of what sprung Cosmonarchy out of Hydra, and it was just this realization that like Hydra no longer is about a co-op campaign and minimal tech tree changes. Hydra has at that time maybe like 10 new units per race. Now we have 50 new units per race. So like
Yeah,
that's the progression.
50.
But like,
Holy shit.
yeah. So it's pretty wild for the number of units that you've got. Even back then, that was seen as a big change. We were expanding the roster all the time. We had much different tech progression. We were starting to experiment with removing supply. I think we removed supply at around the same time we started to call it Cosmonarchy. It wasn't quite 1-to-1. I think we removed supply and we made it so you could harvest Vespene without the geysers. And that let us have a tiered progression system for your resource harvesting, for Vespene harvesting in particular. And so there's a bunch of changes that we made to the mechanics of the game and to the systems that were present in the game and to the way that you progressed through the game's tech and also how you just interfaced with some ideas. Like removing the upgrades was done a bit earlier. Oh man, we had so many versions of the upgrade system. I'll take a moment to think about that. We had a system where at one point we thought, well, why limit it to 3 upgrades? Like let's really see how good upgrades are as a system, and let's try to go for like 5 or 10 levels possible. And what would happen is somebody would turtle, get to like 5 level upgrades, and then you couldn't even approach their army anymore because they would be so powerful.
Yep.
Which maybe we should have been able to foresee, but we wanted to actually like stress test the idea. We got to a point where we were like, well, we don't like that upgrades are inalienable. Like once you get them, you just have them forever. It's nothing else in the game is like that. Like technically you harvest resources and you have them until you spend them, but the idea is that you spend them. And so you turn them into something more actionable. When it comes to upgrades though, you just have it after an invisible amount of time, your army gets invisibly more powerful. Even if you could address the visibility issues of how you like the units afterwards, we felt like there were more interactive ways to do this. So we experimented with like when you have a science facility, that's when your science vessels can cast irradiate. But if you lose the facility, they lose the ability. Certain upgrades would be and tech would be given or unlocked based on your structures that you had. And if you ever lost those, that would be taken away. And I still think that's like a valid way to do it, but it just ended up feeling like a little bit too similar to when you get supply blocked because like 10 depots go down in your base. And suddenly like factories I built on the other side of the map I can't use. What gives? And it turns out because you lost structures unrelated on the other side of the map. And so that felt like not geolocated enough, even though it was better than the supply case because it was one structure, and so you would know to build redundancies if you needed it or whatever. It still just didn't end up sitting right with us the way that it would like be interacted with. So there's a couple of different design things that we did with regards to that in a few places. One of the major moments that I knew we couldn't really call it Project Hydra anymore was when we started having more people looking for 1v1 games and more people making 1v1 maps even than we had people doing, looking for co-op or looking for like even just playing team games or something like that. When people started doing 1v, like at one point we noticed that the code was broken for replays. Like it would just kind of crash when you started trying to watch a replay. And if you don't have replays, it's really hard to do casts. You have to get there and be live every time a game is going on as a caster or as a content creator. And so we were like, well, we can't really do much about that. But then I figured out how to fix that. And so when I fixed that and we started doing more work on it, it was pretty bad at one point. Like there was one weird global variable that wasn't set correctly when you first started the game. So if you played a game and it was your first game you played, and then you went back later and watched the replay without restarting, the replay would break. But when you restarted, it would work. And then if you played the game and it was your second or any number of games after that, and then you went and watched it again, it would work fine. And so that would lead people to say, yeah, the replay works. And then I try to play it and I'm like, I can't. And we came up with this term called the AI sacrifice, which is when you would load up an AI game and just hold the speed up game key until the AI killed you, and then the replay would work. And so that was how we were watching replays for a while.
That's great.
We had to sacrifice ourselves to toasters, as one famous commentator once said. So, so like stuff like that was happening a lot when it came to the tech. And eventually we sifted through. We're still sifting through some issues, but like most of the big ones are gone when it comes to replays. There's like some occasions where something mysteriously still doesn't work in the late game, which makes replays that like go really long more susceptible to it. We have to identify what that is. We'll probably add some more logging for that later. But like by and large, we've significantly improved the replay system and stuff. And when that happened, a lot more people played 1v1s because they knew I would cast them on the YouTube channel. And it's like a couple hundred views. But people like that kind of thing. It's like they see themselves on TV or whatever. When we got to do tournaments, it was this is after the Cosmonarchy rebrand as well. But when we got to do tournaments, I saw people would take pictures of their living room, and it would be like, my YouTube channel pulled up on the living room, and I was like, all right, I guess that's a thing now, So there's all sorts of stuff like that happened, and it was around the time of people taking it more seriously in 1v1 contexts that I was like, oh, this isn't Hydra anymore. Like, we're definitely not in Kansas anymore,
So I have a couple of quick things. I also want to address chat because we've had a bunch and I've missed a bunch. So just to reiterate, to any of you out there who have ever said to me, oh, Robbie, having 4 regional units and 3 unique units for a civilization is too much. Fuck off.
I have 50 units per race, guys.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is so useful and indicative about Cosmonarchy, I joke, right? But it's people will often make the passionate argument that once there's this like magical cutoff number after which something is too complicated.
Okay.
In RTS. I disagree profoundly. And the fact that you guys have built something that complex with Cosmonarchy, this many people like it, and it is this easy to follow, completely trashes that argument. Even with 50 fucking units, you guys have enough visual clarity to make it such that people not only can follow it, but there is a robust, thriving shoutcasting scene for this mod. That doesn't happen if there's muddy visuals. That doesn't happen if people can't understand the difference between units. And so I think that this just completely trashes that argument that I've been fucking dealing with forever.
Yeah.
And it shows me that there is demand for complex RTSs. And I love complexity. I adore it. It's what people always fucking tease me about.
Okay.
Is that I love complexity. And I think that we can lean into complexity so much more than we are. And even for getting a new player involved, you say, well, you don't want to just chuck them in with all 50 and see what happens. Why? Why not? Why not just chuck them in and let them figure it out? Because that was part of the joy of playing video games back before the internet was as big of a spoiler as it is just figuring out yourself and being like, wow, I've never seen this unit before. This is exciting. This is awesome.
Exactly. So I will say just a brief point on what you mentioned there. When it comes to the visual clarity, that is actually something we're still improving from patch to patch.
Because
some, for example, effect overlays are like a little bit too saturated. It's hard to see the units underneath them, that kind of thing. And these are things that, like, as we get more robust graphical pipelines for visual effects, that's something that we're currently lacking in. So a lot of them are recolors of the original game's graphics, or limited things that we've been able to cobble together. So absolutely, there are some genuine concerns about that, but in the same way that there would be concerns if you had a game with bad readability, no matter how many units there were. The visualability or the visual readability complaints, you can get those from specific units that, if you just isolated those, wouldn't even fill out a normal game's unit roster. And so I don't read it as a complaint for what you're talking about, like a valid complaint. I have definitely heard this before. My magnum opus in my head, my platonic ideal of an RTS game, is something where you have 20 different races and each one of them has 100 units and 80 structures.
Completely unique.
Yes. No, there's no overlap. They are all unique. Like there's one race that has to use there's one race that has to use mercenaries as one of their branches that I've envisioned. But even those mercenary units are unique versions. It's just that they've hired out this other race has a guy who got hired out.
Exactly.
And there's the one warrior culture race, and if they sin against each other, if they commit a murder of themselves, some kind of infighting, they're so low population that's seen as a grievous crime, and they're excommunicated forever. And so there's a unit called the Disgrace, and that's one of the mercenaries. And it's he's got nowhere else to go. He might as well.
But the point being is that visual clarity is a fully surmountable barrier. You can get past it, and it's a problem in games that don't pay attention to it, regardless of their size and scope.
It's perpendicular to scope. It has nothing really in relation to it. You get more opportunities to screw up. Your margin of error becomes a little bit more small and truncated when you have more units, because that's more things to account for. But it is, like you say, surmountable.
Totally.
You just need to put effort into it.
Couple quick questions from chat. Sorry if I'm missing people, just going through. Pedro asks, does the United Earth Directorate have a different tech tree from the base Coprulu Terrans?
In Project Hydra, before we were doing so many different tech trees, the original fourth race in Vision was actually going to be the UED. I had a whole concept drafted for like
Cool.
their town center had like a railgun that would periodically shoot resources into orbit, because the fantasy of the race was that they had an orbital cruiser, and that's how you were getting your units. So you would have, I think it was going to be, I don't think you had builders in a traditional sense. It's hard to remember because it's so many years ago. I guess I should preempt this by saying short answer is there is no UED in Cosmonarchy. We don't have any of the original lore. But in my UED plans, I had this idea where your structures would be able to, certain structures, maybe like, think about like kind of like Command and Conquer in a way, where you have the structures being made in some ethereal place that's not relevant, and then like they sort of deploy when you're ready to deploy them. That's sort of what we had going on with the UED, except they had call down beacons that would be placed, and so it would at least tell the other player, oh, you're building this kind of structure, because I can select the beacon and see what it's being made into, and then I know that relatively speaking, like this is how far along in progress it is, even though I can't attack the beacon to deny it. But then when it deploys, it would have like an arming time for maybe like 10 seconds or so, where it would be in a very weakened state and could be focused down, and then it would finish. And so it's kind of like this multi-layered process for construction. But the idea is that it's literally being deployed from orbit and like landing. Your production structures had warp pads. They would warp in from the structure up there, from the command ship up there, things like that. And it was, I think Dune, the original Dune did this. I never played it, which is funny. I played every other RTS game, but never played the original Dune. Dune 2. I think they had this thing where you could queue up one infantry unit, wait for your money, and then queue up like 4 more, and up to 5 units at a time would be like made at once. And so that would be like a little quirk that we thought about putting in for
like
the
a
UED.
squad deploy thing.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a squad. It would be individual units, but you could choose like how many to modulate. Yeah, it would be, exactly, a training batch. So even if you started off with one, you could then quickly like, oh, I'm under attack. Well, that's about to finish in 5 seconds. Let me add more to the thing. And then they like, I'm imagining these other recruits or cadets are scrambling to the front. Like they were on standby the whole way. Like, are we getting the call? Are we getting the call? And then
That's awesome.
like their CO just kind of kicks them into the spot. Like, come on, dive, hell diver, that kind of vibe.
Something.
So, anyway. That's a vibe.
Pardon. Something that Helios Burner says in chat is, ironically, Pronogo, using graphics from 7 different games makes it easier to discern units instead of mistaking one unit or the other during fights.
True, it's true. We have so 5 Nations is one one game that lovingly we refer to as a bit of an asset pack for us, but they do have a lot of assets there, and I streamed their game a bunch of times. I shouted them out a bunch of times. It's a space RTS, so they have no like ground units, but it is one of the last bastions of people trying to make more than like a 3-race or 2-race RTS game. And it is indie, and they don't have any multiplayer, and it's made in JavaScript, and so it's not very performant. And there's a lot of things that you can say about it that are a bit more jank on the side of, for example, like pathfinding and stuff. But I, broadly speaking, think that more stuff like that should happen. And so I was keen to support them. And they were like, hey, you can use this even for paid products if you want later. You can use all our graphics, whatever. We don't care. And I was like, okay,
wow.
Well, just another reason to say, hell yeah,
That's
go
such
check
a
out
big
5
dick
Nations.
thing to say. That's awesome.
I know, yeah. It's a chat energy.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully you guys who are normally watch my content see why I'm talking about this game. This game is doing so many things that I've been talking about for a long time. It's going in a lot of the directions that I've talked about with Total Overhaul, my series where I try to make Age of Empires more than it is. And it's one of the things that I think is just so marvelous about Cosmonarchy is how much it champions complexity, and it embraces complexity, and it loves complexity. I do have, again, a bajillion like small specific questions for you, but just to hit the baseline intro one. New player experience in Cosmonarchy.
Yep.
Not only how have you noticed retention issues for new players coming in? How difficult is it for new players to get into the game? It strikes me as a very sticky game. Like once you like it, you're fucking staying forever. But would you say that the complexity actually makes a barrier to entry? And is it something that you've ever thought about addressing? If so, perhaps with like a tutorial campaign or something like that.
Right. So new player experience comes in. There's a few things that the UI really lets us down in, and we haven't been able to replace the UI. We would have to replace it because modifying it is so painful in a closed source environment. It's one of the things that has very minimal like reverse engineering done on it. People just kind of took it and said, we're not going to do that. That's like such a mammoth task. On the level of like adding widescreen support to the 116.1 version, which would take months of dedicated work from someone who knew they were doing,
Eesh.
according to some people who have talked to me about it. The UI work is kind of in the same boat. And so anyway, in order to access the campaigns, it is a little bit of a challenge sometimes. I guess you could say it's opaque. It's hard to necessarily know exactly where to go. We should probably just have like a video tutorial that talks about installing Cosmonarchy and saying, okay, yeah, you installed it in one click. Good job. All right. And over here, here's the campaigns, and like immediately showing them like where to go for it. The campaigns feature right now, we have one scenario for each race, and we have one tutorial for each race. And there's a couple of small campaign projects that people have made that are either dubiously canon, because there's one comedy project that somebody made, and then there's another one that's just like in the old lore. It's not modern Cosmonarchy lore, and so that's obviously not going to be canon to Cosmonarchy, but you can say what you will about, it's like still references to the Dominion and Rainer's Raiders and stuff like that. And so bottom line is the way that we have done the intro to the game, basically for new players who are just trying to get into it on a gameplay standpoint. Maybe they saw a couple of videos on it. Maybe they're watching this interview right now. Whatever the way of discovering it, if they're trying to get it in, I always tell them to play the tutorial. And I never know how to say it properly, because the tutorial teaches you how to lose. It doesn't actually, it's a lose. You will lose in the tutorial if you're like gold level StarCraft 2 player or something like that. I don't know what the age skill is, like Age of Empires skill metrics are, but like if you're an average RTS player and you don't have any real familiarity with Cosmonarchy, the tutorial is going to teach you to lose so that you can improve based on your reflection of that. You can watch the replay. You can try to figure out how to get into a stalemate so that you can explore the tech tree a little bit more. These are all things you can do. And these are things that the tutorial should probably more vocally encourage you to do. Like there's no line that says, the conceit of the training mission, the tutorial. By the way, the tutorial's all in lore. There's no like click here to do this or whatever.
Yeah.
So we have some assumed competence on the player base because it's a mod. I would do I should probably still do a more basic tutorial for Cosmonarchy, but I would definitely want to ship with one in our own game, where it's like, using the mouse and keyboard and stuff and like basic inputs, even though it can be patronizing. And I don't like when tutorials do it.
A unit.
Yeah. Finding some way to do that in a way that would be better. Like I had this concept for a comedic RTS game where the hand was supposed to be the icon was supposed to be a literal hand, similar to Warcraft 3's human mouse pointer. It's a literal hand of the person that you're supposed to be playing as, and so your second in command, so to speak, is like you got to left poke him and then right poke the minerals or whatever, instead of click, it's poke. And so like that's a way to diegetically talk about it in a really weird way that you couldn't reproduce per se. I guess maybe I could.
I'm just picturing it's a Souls-like RTS, guys.
That has happened before. People have compared it to Dark Souls.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, just because the AI is like also souped up to be more difficult. There's no like difficulty selection or anything. We don't have the UI for that, unfortunately, is like the main limiting factor. But eventually we will do some kind of modulation. I was thinking actually recently, we probably want lower difficulty maps. We can do it on a per map basis where it's configured to be lower difficulty. We could probably do something like that for newer players. But the tutorials are designed to be like a sandbox, if you will, to explore these vast tech trees and actually see what they are. And it's a mirror matchup, so it's not like in addition to learning how Terran works, you have to learn how the Zerg works because the Zerg are your enemy. You're fighting against other Terrans that are even like we have 50 units per race, and we have sub factions that change like maybe 12 units per race, or are made to eventually. Yeah, that's all. So a lot of them only have like say 5 or 6 units replaced. Some of them have even less than that. But eventually, the idea is that they're going to change like about a fourth of the tech tree or so. Jury's still out on whether I do like factional buildings, but I probably will at some point. Anyway, we don't have sub-factions active for that. It's just the melee tech tree that you get when you're playing like ranked mode or whatever. The tutorials are designed to basically be this fork in the road for you by the end, where you can go play more single-player content, especially when we add more single-player content. We have some more that you can check out, as I mentioned earlier, but as we add even more and more, you can play co-op content and be relatively competent. Like, unless you try to cheese the AI, which they are cheesable in the early game in some situations. but even then, you're probably still going to be able to hold your own in like a co-op versus AI game with other people, with your friends or whatever. You'll understand the races, how they work, at least in the early game, at least in the first 10 to 15 minutes. Most people take a lot longer to clear the tutorials than just 10 to 15 minutes. And when it comes to the multiplayer stuff, if you want to play PvP, you could also take that fork. And you know, these aren't discrete paths. Another thing that I really believe in is that the core game should remain the same. You shouldn't have random like micro missions, as we call them, commando missions in the middle of your campaign. You can have that be a UMS mode, some kind of custom map or arcade map that's like off to the side. But the reason why I stay away from those in an official campaign context is because there should be some comparable parity between what you're doing in the campaign and what you're doing in multiplayer and what you're doing
I
in
was
co-op.
going to talk about that as well. Of like especially even in Project Hydra, you tried to make your campaign missions better simulate actual expected play experience, which I think is really interesting and is it's a very different way than a lot of RTSs do it. Not all RTSs, admittedly. Like Age of Empires 4 famously did that and it sucked. So I guess like there's clearly ways to do it wrong by just making campaign maps boring and like not differentiated enough to be special. But the fact that you put so much emphasis on making them reflective of actual gameplay experience, but with twists and distinctions that will keep them unique is, I think, critical and useful and important.
Well, listen, this is the sort of nut of the issue, if you want to call it that, is RTS games and RTS campaign missions play completely differently. Like if you're playing 1v1 on the ladder versus the campaign mission. And that disconnect matters more than people think. Because when you have a dialogue line that says Zeratul is a worthy opponent from Kerrigan in Brood War, and actually it turns out he was like a walkover pushover and you basically fell asleep at your keyboard and still won, that doesn't connect to you like in the same way that if it was the opposite and somebody was like, well, that was easy, and you're bent over sweating on the keyboard, okay, that's also a disconnect. It's just in the other way. And so that's going to be naturally that's going to be something that's different for each player. Like if I was going to do difficulty selection for the campaign, which I'm not interested in because I like the idea that it's a consistent experience. Every player has the shared reality when they recap their experience with the campaign, which for Cosmonarchy isn't really the case because we add and change mechanics and rebalance, and we have no balance freeze for the campaign missions. It's always the same balance as live whenever you're playing it on that version. But when it comes to like a released product that we would envision, I have considered balance freeze before. I do think that would be a sensible idea for the like a game state freeze for like what that is. Even though there'd be differences in statistics, it wouldn't be a difference in how the race operates on a mechanistic level or a systems level. And so you can adapt to that in whatever way when it comes to the multiplayer live balancing. But at least you'll have this shared reality with other players. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, if you're going to do difficulty selection, that should actually change the story. Like, not necessarily in lore, in plot points or whatever, but the characters should react differently to you beating a mission on easy compared to you beating a mission on nightmare or whatever the highest difficulty is. Like, it's a different experience. It does do something different. And there's this disconnect between RTS missions and the story that's being told in the RTS, like in the plot, if you will. Like, the story being told by the gameplay is just completely discordant with the story being told by the narrative, by the dialogue, by what plot points are happening. It's a completely different experience. And unifying that means that now you can think of melee missions against other players, even if they're a bit goofy or chaotic. You can think of that as canon. You can think of the fight that you had with Mystery Meat, one of our legacy players. He doesn't play anymore. Miss you, legend. Mystery Meat versus the Shambler. That was like a big matchup from a while ago, like in the first year of our game. That was every grand final. Every grand final was Mystery Meat versus the Shambler. They were the two top dogs. And then we had Nebline come in from Australia, the boy down under, and he started winning. And anyway, bottom line is you can have those fights, and it doesn't take that much effort in Cosmonarchy to imagine a campaign version of that. It's just, they play like it can be the same thing. Now, your other point that you brought up, the naysayer of that idea, that is the basically like the biggest criticism is what it sounds like Age of Empires 4 did, where every mission is, oh, you start off in the same way and you have the same stuff and it just feels boring. So that doesn't have to be the case. I do think that that's a false dichotomy. Either you have really wacky missions that don't at all compare to StarCraft, like the stock ladder experience, or you have the complete opposite of that, where every mission is the same. Every mission is easily comparable. I think if you're going to have, for example, we talked about like pre-placed units and having everything at the start of the map and stuff. That was one of the things I brought up earlier. And one of my dissatisfactions with the original campaign and with RTS campaigns at large. If you have a fortress, because in lore there's a fortress there, then you just need to justify why that fortress doesn't immediately quash whatever's around it. And that could be because there's 3 players that are all vying for supremacy over the fortress player, the 3 commanders that are trying to defeat and siege this fortress, and they might not even be allied to each other, but that's going to keep the fortress guy at home because he doesn't want to send his troops out to quash enemy A and then get attacked by B and C at the same time. He will lose that. And what matters is self-preservation. The agents of the map are doing things that correspond and comport with reality and what their actual goal is. They have a goal. Like a lot of the times you feel alone and empty on a map, even if there's so much stuff there because the AI is not really doing anything with it.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we really wanted to combat with the campaign missions. And so we do that with the tutorials. Like there's maybe a bit less dialogue than people are used to from modern RTS games like StarCraft 2 when it comes to the campaigns. But we try to make it so that the dialogue is there. I'm doing the majority of the voice acting. I didn't do everything in the Terran tutorial, but I did everything in Protoss and Zerg. The voice acting people generally think is pretty good. That's one of the things that I think I was telling you earlier before we were going live. Like, I don't necessarily do like modeling really well, but I'm a pretty good voice actor. I can do things like I can handle myself in that respect, in that domain.
Sick.
So I'm not worried about that aspect of it. Even though it's a lot of the same guy. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is like there are hooks here, like you were talking about stickiness. There are hooks for the lore. There's hooks for people who are interested in and open to the idea of like a complete rewrite of what the original StarCraft setting is. And basically we'll treat it like its own game or a new game. And there's hooks there for people who are interested in it. But it kind of gets out of the way quickly. For example, the intro to all of the campaign missions I've personally released so far, including the tutorials, have a longer first run intro, and then if you lose the mission and restart it, to prevent you from getting jaded because you hear the same opening transmission over and over again and you have to like opt in to skip, we have a truncated cut down version of the intro that plays.
That's
because
great.
we have like we've modded in bank data to the game so we can load data based on like, have you done this before? That wasn't a feature in the original game. So the thought process behind the change there is just do you have awareness of what the player really wants here? Like, they don't want to be alone on a map by themselves. They don't want to hear the same dialogue line over and over again because they're restarting so much. There's things that you can do to make it so that they also don't want every mission to be the same. And so the naysayers are right to bring up this as a complaint and a concern. That's totally valid. But there are ways, just like the surmountable information gap that you were talking about earlier, or readability gap. There are ways to tackle this. There are ways to deal with that.
Yep. Something I wanted to jump in that I think segues neatly to this is single player versus multiplayer experience. Because even though it's sick that you guys have such a robust competitive scene, it's sick that you're getting pros involved. I have often made the argument that games... that a lot of modern games wildly over-index into esports and try too hard to push esports and forget that the majority of players who are going to play a game are going to be casual single-player players. Now, obviously, that may not be the case for a mod that you have to jump through a shit ton of hoops for, but I think that you can agree that, like, in the average game put out to the masses, that is going to be what happens. So my question was, how do you personally prioritize single player versus multiplayer experience? Because obviously your campaigns are designed to reflect a multiplayer experience. What about for the people who would never touch that? Do you think that they are mostly going to be contented with the campaigns and the skirmishes and maybe alt modes like, the solo hero thing that you were talking about, maybe having that as an alt campaign and stuff like that? Where do you personally place your priorities? Understanding, of course, that as a mod with a lot of hoops to jump through, you're going to prioritize multiplayer more than average.
Yeah, so I feel like the mod support that we have, or like the multiplayer support that we have, it's mostly self-germinating at this point because we've got other people than me making maps for the multiplayer for like 1v1 experience. We've got other people than me thinking about running tournaments, even just for fun tournaments. So all I really need to do for the multiplayer support now that we've laid all this groundwork is I need to basically do the honors on the initial setup for sorry, my voice is failing me today.
No
But
problem. No problem.
I need to do the initial setup for tournaments. I definitely need to do that. When it comes to anything else, the bottom line has to be that the players have a good time and they can experience something good. And my real passion does come down to a lot of single player and cooperative stuff. That to me is more important than a lot of like the esports stuff that you were saying. I agree that a lot of a lot of the issues that plague, for example, like the Stormgate launch. I'm not sure about Age 4.
Age 4 was a big fucking pain in the ass, to be
Was
honest.
it a flop?
No, like, I wouldn't say it's a flop, but they really focused esports to, I would say, an unhealthy degree, and they just tried to make, like, Agecraft. It's literally, I've described Age of Empires 4 as just being StarCraft 2 with Age of Empires paint. And I think that might be kind of uncharitable. There are parts about the game I do think are actually really cool. But I think that it's wild overemphasis on the competitive scene, in my opinion, to the substantial detriment of the single player scene, is a big problem with it.
Yeah, I think that when you focus on esports too much, when you focus on forcing an esport, it has been done in the past. Overwatch, Valorant, these are forced esports. These are, and that sounds like a negative thing, and I think it kind of is. But
I think it kind of is too, to be honest. But
the way that they go about it is like those are multiplayer specific games. Like I know Overwatch 2 is supposed to have some single player or co-op or whatever, and then they rug pulled. But generally speaking, and in the inception of Overwatch in the original game, it is just a multiplayer game. And so that's a little bit more understandable. They need some place for the hardcores to go.
Sure.
The casuals are going to go to more casual game modes that are strictly multiplayer. There's no single player component. It's also a different genre. But those kinds of esports, you notice something in common. Activision Blizzard and Riot Games. So huge investment, huge amounts of marketing and PR departments, insane amount of cash flow to like seed this competitive space. And also connections with industries that are going to run tournaments like ESL, now owned by Saudi Arabia, rest in peace, of course. When it comes to the what's the other big one? PGL. They say it's still independent. I don't think they do any events for Overwatch or anything like that, but they do a lot of white label stuff. So there are tournament companies. We've contacted PGL to potentially do Cosmonarchy events in the future, like just to see if that was even a possibility. And they were like, yeah, well, hit us up with details. And I was like, all right, cool. I will when I have details. And that was a while ago, so I don't know. They might not even remember that. But when it comes to the like the process of experiencing the game, you don't have a lot of people watching esports, and like there's some overlap between people who play competitive and watch esports, but it's not as high as you would think. A lot of people just watch and a lot of people just play. Usually I guess people who do play will also watch, like maybe on a higher degree, but there's a lot of people who watch Cosmonarchy and only play single player, right? Like as an example, that's an anecdotal thing I can share. When it comes to like actual data that we have, there are more people watching, say, Counter-Strike esports than there are playing the game.
Oh, a lot more.
Especially when you factor like bots and stuff, like inflating the account numbers for active players. So that's like one example as well. Obviously, if you go to traditional sports, football, in American football, this is a situation where so many more people are watching than playing. I mean, people will play like a backyard game or something every now and then, but like it's not the same thing, right? Obviously. So there's this dynamic that we can appreciate, that there's a lot of more people who are going to be watching than playing. And there's also going to be a lot more people who their appreciation of a particular game is not really connected at all to what some, super try hard guy who's really good at the game, pro in multiple, disciplines or whatever. And then he comes in and he's playing like, we've seen a lot of attention from pro players joining, from having these competitions, from people who are not even pro level, but like amateur level in other games, coming in and trying to do well and, grinding the game as well, and changing over and no longer being as interested in the original game, or even if they are, they split attention, they split time, that kind of thing. We have seen a lot of attention from that, but I know that we don't have any telemetry, we don't have any data gathering, but I know from talking to some people that we've got like a bunch of Chinese users and a bunch of Korean users that don't interface with the English speaking community whatsoever. And we would love for them to do that. We have like the infrastructure in place for them to speak in their own language in the Discord server, for example, if they want to. We'd love for more people to come in and join us there. But they generally gravitate towards platforms other than Discord. They generally use platforms and have their own communities and stuff. And so at any given time, we have way more users playing not competitively. We much more on the cooperative side or the casual side, like playing big game hunters or whatever. You know what I mean? Like just some like FFA map or whatever, some 3v3 map, something like that. We have way more people doing that than we have people even paying attention to the competitive space and the tournaments and stuff.
See, to
Let alone
me,
actually
that is the,
participating.
pardon me, that is the sign of a healthy game. I
Yeah,
genuinely
absolutely.
believe that. Because, like, when you look to Age of Empires, again, pardon the interruption, just to give an example.
Go for
When Age of Empires was in its dark age, that
it
was
should be
in.
removed.
It should, I agree. That was back in like the 2000 and roughly 5 to 2000 and roughly 9 when we were forced to use this platform called Voobly, and which was like a matchmaking thing that facilitated the competitive game.
Okay.
And the reason I say that that was the dark age is that that was when we had, I would say, one of the lowest proportions of pro to casual. Like a lot of the people who played the game were obsessed with the game and were like either competitive players, people who followed competitive. There was still a committed community of modders and like people doing their own thing. That was awesome. But the proportion of normal people who were just dropping in to play single player, or maybe just screwing around on multiplayer,
Yep.
like
Yeah.
custom maps,
Yeah.
that was way lower at that point. And now that we're having a resurgence, a lot of that comes from recourting the casual player. The fact that you guys do have a casual base, despite all the fucking hopes, is huge. And I would also credit a chunk of that to the game's complexity. I feel like there's this wild misapprehension that casual players don't like complexity. They want simple. They want you to fucking feed them like plain white rice on a spoon. I completely disagree with that. I think that part of the joy of having a big complex game is exploring it and discovering it and finding
Correct.
all the weird jank interactions between things. Not to mention the modding support, the vast amount of custom content you guys have, the campaigns and things being like difficult, but then you can also just play against AI. And if you want to just have a chill experience, I bet you can do something where you have like two AI partners and you steamroll two AI enemies because you outnumber them. Yeah, like
That's what people recommend actually if
just
they're
play
trying to learn
casual.
how to be the
Yeah, play casual. And I think so. In summary, I think that you guys have a smart approach to that. But something I want to also ask about, kind of a twofold thing, is one, how much do you think Cosmonarchy's lore plays into that?
Okay.
Because I would argue that lore is typically a very good draw for a certain casual audience. But two, when you guys do balance updates, to whatever degree you do you balance
Right.
around competitive or casual?
Okay, interesting. So, lore-wise, I don't know how deep the lore has penetrated. We have a lore channel on our Discord server, and there are questions and there pretty frequently discussions and stuff. But it's usually like 5 to 10 power users that are interested in that sort of thing, and other people will read it or like react messages to it.
Yeah,
or whatever.
classic.
The more
With
more on the lore
lore,
side.
there's always going to be like those few people who are obsessed with it, and then a bunch of people just kind of being like, that's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's a lot of people who are super active. Like even in the chat, it was Shambler who said, "Time DMT zombies are the super soldiers of humanity," and he's saying that because the Terrans have this mechanic called reclamation. Certain units are able to take corpses and locally rewind time to when they were alive, but that doesn't keep the consciousness intact because the soul is separate from the body at that point. And so they basically turn into what we colloquially call them time zombies, and that's like a weird thing for them to deal with. And when people find out about that, they're like, "Wow, that's pretty weird." Like so I've heard people call them necromancers before, even though it's like not a fantasy game. But there's elements of that were like that's out there. Well, what's even more out there is that Terrans are the only race that have access to DMT, and that's what they're actually chemically using to power this stuff. And so that's wild and nowhere presented in the game. That's just something somebody found out because they asked me the question of how it works. I was like, yeah, well, Protoss don't have DMT and Zerg don't have DMT, so that's it. There you go. That's the holy icon for you. So that's just like one lore tidbit, but there are people who know that kind of thing, like Shambler, and who will talk about that as like a funny little like a what this guy just said what like time DMT zombie what. So that's the kind of thing that like there's definitely something there that would be. You were talking about stickiness earlier. I think lore is a great way to be sticky for certain people. But what matters a lot for that is going to be presentation. like I said earlier, like the lore of StarCraft 1 is not something that grabbed me, but the presentation did. The presentation was like, here's some well voice acted, um, usually punchy, sometimes a little bit extravagant and overlong dialogue events, and hinting at what might have happened before, like with the Guild Wars, was like an event in StarCraft 1's lore that preceded what goes down in the first campaign, but hinting at what that might have been, or just like referencing it, making references to this world building, makes it feel rich. And then, you read a book that was written by somebody who was totally disconnected from the game, and they're like, yeah, the Guild Wars were actually this, and this is what, and it's like not interesting anymore because like you've told me what's in the mystery box. Like the mystery box had a label, but you didn't actually know what it looked like, and then when it looked like it wasn't, it felt like
Sure.
false advertising or something. You know what I mean? Like it's not actually the cool thing. And so
A quick follow up from chat. So sorry, before the other one is
Yeah.
what a chatter RL Dragonstrider asked. What can you briefly explain why you don't like vanilla StarCraft lore? What about it
Oh, sure.
didn't you like?
What about StarCraft 1 lore did I not like? A lot of it comes back down to the gameplay experience because when you're talking about these characters running like these commanders, commanding military, particularly when it comes to like Raynor, for example, pulling away from the Dominion is like a valid choice, but you have to like shelve the part of your brain that thinks about all the soldiers that follow his commands, and the idea that they would choose to rebel in a violent way that would get a lot of them killed, um, in what at that moment is like a totally, like you could have totally avoided that conflict. For example, there's like things like that. A lot of the lore, if you read the manual, for example, doesn't really add up for like, it also is in conflict with a lot of the game, so that doesn't help either. I guess to limit my complaints just to the game of StarCraft 1 lore, uh, I think that StarCraft 1 has cool ideas like an alien invasion of Zerg, and then they're followed up by glassing by Protoss, and it's like really cool to see the interplay between the races. It's like you thought the big horror was the aliens, but actually there's a different alien race that thinks that they are indeed very horrible. Obviously, Halo famously took example of this, where you have the Covenant glassing flood planets, like infected by the flood, including like Earth at one point is threatened by the same operation because flood ended up going there, and it's like it's very very similar to Zerg and Protoss dynamic for Terran colonies in the Capru sector. And so there's a lot of like, I think when you see people taking cargo cult examples of or homages to that kind of stuff, it kind of indicates that hey, there was something to this, like from a concept level.
Yep. I agree.
I don't think that it holds up under scrutiny when it comes to the substance of it. And so it's like the more you find out about it, the less good it is. And I'm not really giving specific examples here. So I guess I'll just say like, when you think about the way that the dialogue conflicts so much with what the window dressing of the game is trying to imply, when you're trying to imply these big fights, then you have dialogue like Tassadar in the end of the Vanilla Protoss campaign, where he says that like the fate of the entire universe rests on our actions here, and there's no reason to think that it's as grandiose as that, and it takes you out of it. It's like, but this is one sector, and we don't even know how vast it is, but it's very far away from Earth. Anyway, stuff like that. When the UED shows up, they totally like artificially make it feel like a smaller universe, a smaller world, because Earth is now directly meddling with this faraway sector, which kind of like the main the value add of it being so far away was that it was disconnected from our local space, or so far away that like we were basically imagining like, man, these guys are marooned far away from Earth. That's so sad for the Terrans, and like now they're in hostile space. And then like, well, actually the UED was watching the whole time and they can just show up. And I get that they are supposed to have advanced technology, but that's actually the only advanced technology they have besides medics and Goliath range and Valkyries. And so it's like, it's not really advanced technology at the end of the day. So there's that. There's like all of the stuff with Kerrigan, every Kerrigan bit ever since she gets infested. That's a real big one for me because it takes this unknowable force of nature that the Zerg are and humanizes them, because it literally puts a human in their roster and says she's really important. She's the chosen one for Zerg or whatever.
She's hot.
Yeah, something like that. And so, like the idea of
if she had
Kerrigan,
become hideous, I would have actually been way more invested. To be perfectly honest.
true. Yeah, well, not just hideous from a physical level too, but like hideous from a psychological level,
or
or
like a moral level. Just make her a Zerg. If you're gonna make her a Zerg, make her a fucking Zerg.
Right, and they kind of make it like she's definitely very immoral. She kills like billions of people or whatever. But the like obviously StarCraft 2 redeems her, which is really funny to me. I think if she had just died and it wasn't Kerrigan anymore, but it was some like they used her vessel, which was like eerily experimented on to be more psionic than more psionically powerful and potent than other Terrans have been, and that's why the Overmind chose her vessel to become something else, and it wasn't Kerrigan anymore. Obviously, that means it's one less like active character. I'm sure a lot of people would push back on that idea, but I feel like when it comes to the way that Kerrigan is depicted, she feels very like petty, feels very like kindergarten level almost when it comes to her decision making.
I'm a bad guy now, so now I'm gonna be mean.
And like even her famous line, "I'm pretty much the queen bitch of the universe," to me doesn't land to me. I just think of that as kind of goofy.
So cringe. Like I did not.
I'm not a fan, and I know some people are, and that's just a taste difference. I think like if you really enjoyed the original StarCraft 1 story, and that's separate from the lore. Like the lore is presented very vaguely. And that's actually to its credit. There's a game called Warlords Battlecry. A franchise actually called Warlords Battlecry. Yeah,
they have a big mod for that too, actually.
Yeah, the Protectors. I'm the guy we walk in the same circles, I guess. Connected by.
Put me in touch. I want to talk to that dude.
yeah. We'll do. Patrick is his lead dev name. I'll see if I can. I'll give you his like Discord info and stuff. But when it comes to the way that the like story is presented in that game, in the original game, they make references and allusions to stuff that like might be happening around you, and it's kind of interesting. And then like in a later game or a later part of the story, they actually show you what's there, and it's nothing. It's like a wasteland compared to what you thought it was. It was like just the window dressing that they said was all that was actually there. And so that's like one example of it in another game, if people are aware. And so I feel like StarCraft has that problem where they're being reduced in level of quality and experience by like the experience is made worse by the gameplay being bad and discordant with the story, and it's also being reduced by the fact that like the dialogue is parochial. You know what I mean? It's not really on an elevated level, and that doesn't mean you need to start writing Shakespeare or anything. It just means that like the characters' motivations are so out of line with what would make sense. It throws away the idea that like each individual unit has agency. And by the way, like I'm a real big fan of individual units. I know we talked about scale earlier. I'm not a fan of total annihilation because you zoom out and they become geometry. And it's like, I can't invest into the unit then. I like the fact that there's a portrait for each unit. I like the fact that each unit has unit responses. You get a feeling of the character of the unit. And that is also an aspect of the lore that gets run over when you examine the way that like apparently you can throw 1,000 Marines at the Dominion in the final mission of the Vanilla Terran campaign because Raynor doesn't like how Mengsk did stuff. And Mengsk does some horrific stuff, but you can probably find a way out of his fold, so to speak, without sending 1,000 dudes to die. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's a really good comprehensive response, and I'm sure we could dive into it a lot more, but just to keep it schmoovin', the other thing I wanted to ask in that we mentioned earlier is balancing around high-level competitive versus casual or somewhere in between. And also, I guess, your general philosophy on balance, how often you do it, what you touch, buff versus nerf, that sort of shit.
So a lot of the data we get to engage in balanced discussions for like myself with my co-developer, Veek7 is his username. We talk about balancing mostly in the terms of changing a concept. We don't care as much about hardcore statistics when we're talking about those things, but we do keep them in mind. I am living and breathing the competitive scene a bit more actively than he is, as he's the systems architect, the programmer, but he also shares game dev responsibilities. So he'll give me some input on changes that I usually propose, and we'll go back and forth. Sometimes he has a proposal. And so a lot of the time when it comes to balancing, the key issue is you get people who feel like they can't do anything as this race in this matchup. And then the other side will argue their case. And it's like this debate because they don't want to lose the good stuff that they have, but they want the other guy to lose their good stuff or at least have it be less good.
The classic, yes.
Yes. And so you have to sort of modulate that. We actually had a thread called Considering Future Changes, and it was just all balance wine, the whole thread. And I was like, on the one hand, a mark of a competitive game that has stuck with people. They're all balance wining. It's finally happening to me. I used to dream, or at least daydream, about a forum that had heated discussions about what units were OP or whatever. And now it's actually happening just in a Discord scene, because back when I had that dream, forums were still a thing. And so that's funny to me in a way, and it's like I got to remind myself to look on the bright side. But also, we locked it because it was not productive. So you no longer have that outlet. Now you got to just talk in the regular channels, and then other people are like, "Stop balance whining," and I don't even police it anymore. I do still take it into account that, like, if somebody tells you in a really rude way that your hair looks kind of messed up, the stoic principle is to say, thanks for telling me about my hair, and move on. Or maybe not even say anything, but like know that somebody thinks there's something wrong with your hair.
I get that a lot, yes.
Oh, okay, fair. It wasn't a targeted thing. I was actually looking at myself for that. But the thought process there is like, you're looking at the feedback and you're saying, this guy did it in a really rude way. This character was not very nice. But at least now I know. I am potentially more informed, unless it's like total misinfo, obviously, but I'm potentially more informed that somebody out there has this opinion, right? If it's an opinion shared in good faith, even if it's a rude one, it's still something that you can account for in your decision making. It's one piece. And I never take somebody saying this unit is OP, even if it's a pro player, especially if it's a pro player, actually, because they haven't really played that much and they're sharing their first impressions. Like, we had some StarCraft 2 pros play last week, and they were like one of them was like, I think Terran is OP because the Terran guy won so much. But the Terran guy practiced for a week going in, and the other guys did not. That was my I was like, I can't even engage with you on the balance. I didn't say this to the guy. I was like, if you want, I can show you some Zerg versus Terran matches where the Zerg won. And he was like, yes. And I was like, so okay. So I tried to redirect that. You got to redirect that energy into like, no, you're mistaken, but like, I understand the impulse. And so when it's stuff like that, you have to be able to understand that somebody feels that way, and then you look at it as the developer. You are the designer. You are the auteur. You are the craftsman. You are going to look at this and say, I'm going to look at this through my own design prism, my own lens, if you will. I'm going to scan what's happening here. Is this actually a problem? Yeah. And it might take you a while to come to a decided conclusion. You try to do your best to not have like a bias because you really like that unit or you think that mechanic is super cool. Like, people have told me so many times that reclamation thing that I was telling you about earlier, the time DMT stuff, that's OP, that's like fundamentally you'll never be able to balance that. And some of these people have played a lot of RTS games. I don't think any RTS designers have told me that, but even if they did, so what? Like, that's a thing that has happened. You kind of have to stand in stark opposition if you really believe in an idea, but you can't let that cloud your judgment if you think you can make tweaks to it to make it more interactive. And that's where I'm going to get to your second part of the question, which is, what is the thought process behind balancing? So I've basically answered that a lot of the 1v1 gamers are the ones who are giving a lot of the feedback there. And so in theory, that would mean that we're balancing around the 1v1 experience, but I play a lot of free-for-alls and I play a lot of campaign content because I'm making it, so I'm testing it a lot. And so there's a lot of components there where you have to think about it, and I'm experiencing it from a different spot. We have somebody saying remove toss. Classic me.
I've seen that a couple of times.
Okay. Very briefly, there was a Taiwanese player who doesn't have great English, is playing Protoss, and he got killed by something new that the Zerg had in a recent update. And he said, well, remove toss. I don't know what that means still to this day. It's such a brilliant, like, Hanlon's razor or whatever. What do you see? A Rorschach test. What do you see there? Yeah. Like, is he saying you basically removed toss because you've made it so hard? Is he saying you should remove toss because it's too hard to play? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what he's saying.
There's an old Age of Empires meme called Grass, where a Chinese player was insulting a Western player to beat him, and he said, grass your sister. And no one knows what that means. And so they just started using grass in various contexts.
Like, your sister's a hamster and they need to eat grass.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Yeah. Feed your sister. For all I know, like, your sister is a hamster is actually like a grave epithet.
Yes. And your father smelled of elderberries.
Right, exactly. Yeah, same energy. So yeah, when it comes to the like design process of a balance update, we are balancing around the idea that interactivity is what matters most. So if there's a lot of compositions right now where Protoss will get to an artillery comp, and then the Terran ground army feels like it can't engage. But the reason Protoss go for the artillery comp is because the Terran ground army has the siege tank, the phalanx, is what we call it in Cosmonarchy. And that has the biggest, that has the longest unit-based weapon range. Spoiler, in Tier 3, Terrans can make the ion cannon, the diadem. So that has the longest range of anything in the game. But, these are like ways to sort of do area denial. When it comes to like the complaints about that particular matchup and how it's like kind of a race between them, I have a healthy dose of skepticism about whether it's the only option, whether it's the only thing, because there's so many units to explore, and kind of like people get set in their ways in a 1v1 sense where they are trying to play to the meta. And then you'll get like a new player who joins who doesn't have these preconceptions, and they show us that actually something is really strong here that we weren't noticing. Or somebody will just get desperate enough to start experimenting with something super wild and that other people of their race think is really bad, and it turns out to be pretty doable. And like, even if it's not actually better than the alternative that was the meta, it existing demands a different response from the other player. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the meta will shift to accommodate this as an option, like an alternative that you can do. And so I don't ever think of balance updates as this unit needs to be buffed or nerfed. There's some cases where it's like I made a mistake with the initial math and the unit is more powerful or less powerful than it should have been.
That's different.
Or right. Like I almost think of that as a bug fix, even though it's not technically.
I'd argue it's more of a bug fix.
It's closer to that philosophically than like I'm going to change this unit. What I like to do is change units based on the idea that the game should be more interactive. And so that could be like taking an artillery unit and making it take more time to wind up its shot. Okay, so there's a specific example I can give of this. The Terrans have the Ghost, the Eidolon in Cosmonarchy is what it's called. And the Eidolon actually is very meta. We don't have damage types, so that's another system that we pulled out from the game. We just have armor and armor penetration. And so the Eidolon deals a lot of upfront damage, so it's not really reduced that much by armor. Like you can have 3 armor, but it's dealing 15 damage. So it's still 12 damage. It's still a lot of damage. It has very good range, and in order to detect them, you have to enter their proximity cloak range, which is like 3, and I think they have 8 range or 9 range. So you have to get to pretty close to the unit with like a melee unit or just face tank with like a ranged unit in order to decloak them. In small numbers, they drop like flies, but if you mass up enough of them, and they are very expensive to do so, you need some kind of counter artillery and detection in order to see them, or some kind of artillery that like people started to use the Protoss Architect, which has 10 range, so it's a little bit better, but you still need to be able to see them, is the bottom line. So the way that has ended up influencing the design, if you will, is the changes that I took to make the unit more engaging and more interactive is I gave them a short wind-up, which makes it so that you can't stutter step with them, because that's what players were doing. Yep. But I decreased their attack cooldown, which is another way of saying increase their attack speed, so that they actually have more DPS if you can garrison them in a spot and then not have to move them anymore.
Sure.
They'll actually do more damage than they were doing before, which should have made the unit, in theory, more powerful if you were doing proper setup with them. The problem is that people solve for the meta. It was more meta to stutter step with them, which is totally incomprehensible to a sniper role. You don't like walk forward and shoot a sniper and walk forward and shoot. That's not how it works. That's more like a steady aim with like an autogun or something, like a automatic weapon. So now that people can't do that anymore, the unit did see an initial dip in usefulness. And we've seen some people picking them back up and still mixing them in, despite this change, including some pro players that are just kind of accustomed to building them by now. And we also gave them before they were a hit scan unit, which means that they don't have a projectile. We gave them a projectile that helps indicate where they are from. So that helps you, and you can count the number of laser bolts that are hitting you. So you can kind of think like, oh, I think that was like 10. So he probably has a good number. I should be pretty careful here. Little changes on the UX level almost to like make it so that it's a bit more possible to shadowbox how to fight them and then actually fight them. And so forcing them to disengage forces them to lose DPS and fall away, and they are slower units, and so they can't stutter step as much now because it takes more long for them to get set up. It's like adding a setup time almost. Stuff like that. Another option would have been to make it so that they turn less fast, but that they're an infantry unit, so that didn't really make sense. Making them more slow, I didn't really want to do that because I feel like being able to move around the map is supposed to be a bio thing, and they are a bio unit. So these are like considerations that I went in, but in nowhere in the way did I say the unit should no longer exist. And the naysayers would say, just remove this unit or something. You know what I mean? Like the extreme people, like the extreme take was delete the unit, you can't balance it. And I think it is possible to come up with a systemic, like mechanical implementation of the unit that is balanced, that is actually not just balanced, but fun. It was like more important for me for it to be fun. People weren't having fun with the unit. Even people who were making the unit felt like it was just kind of a boring thing. And it goes back to the fun. Like all the things that we're talking about here go back to the fun, the complexity, the depth of the game. Veek7, my co-dev, doesn't like complexity. He prefers the term depth because he thinks that of complexity as something that is needless and should actually be avoided. And we have some tension about that because I think there's some depth you can't get without complexity, and he will concede that point. But I think his threshold for how much complexity you need per depth is like, he thinks the exchange rate is one way and I think it's another, basically. Sure. Is one way to put it. I think there's value in jank, honestly. I think like having slow moving units give you a different balancing lever, and people who come from StarCraft 2, as Veek did originally, people who come from StarCraft 2 typically will think, oh, this game has like, less responsivity in some ways. Although ironically, we've made the game a lot more responsive than StarCraft 1. So people coming from that have a much more positive view of it because they say, it's so easy to control armies. I can't believe it. There's some small pathfinding improvements and a bunch of changes in that sort of way. Also, the selection limit is much higher. You can select up to 200 plus units now,
which is
instead of just 12.
Incredible. That's huge. And so that kind of concept was like, oh, multi-building select also added. Like, these are things that are, the point of them is to make it so that it's easier to get to and manage at scale, especially since you have all of these units, right? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Something again in the design direction, but then I want to jump into depth versus complexity, because unfortunately we're getting towards the end. Like, this is why I was like, I want to talk as long as I can with you, man. The thing I wanted to ask in the buff nerf direction, apologies, is if you see a unit being underutilized or barely touched, what do you do with it? Do you buff it? Do you leave it? Do you just allow it to be there and see if something comes up? To what degree do you allow units to be bad?
Oh, okay, interesting. If you ask the average player, no matter what race they are, they always say, yeah, this unit just sucks. Like, they have a unit in mind when they hear bad unit, and it's usually a unit of their race, which is fine. Like, that just means that they've tried it a bunch of times and it's been bad.
Of course.
So I guess if you ask the average player who's really into the 1v1 space, they would say, I do it a lot. I let a lot of units just be bad. Because actually, I look at them as they're sleeper agents awaiting an awakening code, which is going to be some player who finds out a use for them. And they have a use implicit in their design. I'm designing the units, and Veek is helping me design the units with a role in mind. At first, we just needed volume. Like, we just needed a lot of units, and we almost thought of it as like a replacement for upgrades. In a way it is. As you tech up, instead of upgrading sequentially, you can replace your Mavericks with Madcaps. Your Marine equivalent is the Maverick. And Madcap is this unit that, instead of stimming to get its stim packing and to get its attack speed buff, the Madcap just gets more attack speed the more it fires without moving. And so if you can keep them in one spot, it's like the opposite sort of thing, because Mavericks try to chase people down. So there is a distinct combat role there, but they typically do more DPS because they live for longer. They've got more damage density, which is like this concept of having a bunch of units in one spot. And also they have more weapon range, more armor penetration. Even with a stutter stepping approach, you can get more out of Madcaps in many cases than you can get out of Mavericks. And so they could be construed as an upgrade. This is glossing over the fact that you have to build a different structure for them, and so it's like different infrastructure.
And like
required.
You could hypothetically, if you committed to Mavericks, you might want to still be using them because you have a certain like strategic goal for them in mind. Yeah, totally.
Yep, absolutely. And they train faster and are cheaper, so you can kind of like scatter them across the map for scouting or something. There's like loads of things that you could do. But when it came to the idea of units might be bad, like, we did initially just need volume, and so some units felt like they were just echoes of another unit, and like the value prop was kind of confusing. There was still a value prop because maybe they were unlocked by a different structure or required a different factory to produce or something. And so they could be seen as like, if I'm going mech, I can make this unit. If I'm going bio, I can make this unit. But a lot of the times, those have, over time, become more distinct by role. We've had more consequential changes to the tech trees the longer the game has gone on, to the point where now we see way more involvement in like people experimenting with trying to filter in this unit that has been lesser used. The Protoss Aurora is a basic fighter unit that comes out of the Stargate, and most people gloss over it because there's more powerful options that have, in most people's minds, more decided roles. But there was a Protoss player recently who just decided, I'm going to see if I can just build like 20 of these. And when they take fatal damage, they kamikaze into an enemy ground unit, and it deals splash damage when it hits.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
So, because they're a spammable fighter, right? That's like the fantasy of the unit is like, I'm going to have a lot of these. And if you fly over a like one of the problems with her air-based harassment is, like fundamentally, we think ground units should be more powerful than air units. And so we give a lot of options, even for static defense, to fight air units. And the counter to this is like trying to get some kind of death stack to overwhelm them, but even that can be difficult with splash damage. But this guy with the Auroras, because dying is an asset for them, just flew them over an enemy mineral line and was able to get a lot of worker kills with them because they were being shot down. And that's not, they actually have more DPS if you're killing them than if you're not. Another kind of example of this
Awesome.
is the Simulacrum, which has perennially been like a unit that goes up and down in terms of use. The Simulacrum is a Protoss unit, a ground unit. When you deal hull damage to it from an enemy does it, you can't proc this yourself. When an enemy deals hull damage to the Simulacrum, after 5 seconds it will clone itself and it will have the same health as it had when it cloned.
That's so rude.
So if you have very low DPS in an area, or say a static defense structure that you can't tell to hold fire because we don't have that command in the game, you can just walk right up and say, start farming the Sims. Like the Zerg static defense structure, anti-surface defense structure, has just enough damage to do like, I think 4 or 5 damage to the Sim through its shields when it has base shields. It's like 20 base shields or whatever. And so, or 15. So it deals 5 damage too because it's 20 damage attack. So then the Sim will come away with 5 less health and walk in for 1 hit, walk back out. And you could get like 30 Sims from that kind of thing. They might all be brittle by the end because they're at the same health that they were, but it's a huge value add to that unit. And so like we just had a pro player lose to a Simulacrum based all in from another more experienced player who's not as good, who was actually just trying to rush because he like, I got to go somewhere. I got to do this right now. It's like, this happened like a week or so ago. And it was in like a tournament based match. Every other week we're trying to do this like tournament thing where we have like players who can sign up, and it's like top 4 have like, it's a $50 prize pool. It's very minimal, but it's like top 4 have that and bragging rights, and everybody else kind of just hits the curb, and it's very fast move. It's all in one day. And so the pro was signing up for this, and in the upper bracket he had a match against this guy who did this Simulacrum based move, and he had no idea what to do. He made splash damage, but that's actually bad if you have too little splash damage because you're procking it for every exactly.
That's so funny.
Like instead of losing units, the Protoss was gaining units, and like this guy was just like, "What even happened?" And so I had to explain how the ability worked. That's like a learning experience because he hasn't played the tutorials because he's a pro. He just wants to drop in.
Like when you have all of this stuff, it means that there are new vectors for strategy and attack for anyone who understands the game and can think tactically, which I love. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I know that you got to run in like 5 minutes, and I wanted to ask one last thing to kind of round it out, if that's all right. Again, I'm sorry to derail you, but
no worry.
Again, for everyone in chat, for everyone who's filtering in, this fine man Pronago has created the most legendary StarCraft Brood War mod I've ever seen. We are learning lessons from it that we can apply to Age of Empires. We're learning lessons about depth. We're learning lessons about complexity and scale and what can be gotten away with. We're learning lessons about the importance of single player versus multiplayer, about balance, a lot of things that are wildly applicable. Since I see people asking for it in chat, I'll throw the links in once again. Download Cosmonarchy. It is completely free. You also get you get a version of StarCraft for free that you can play it off of. There's also a Discord that you can join. My final question is, we could talk for another 3 hours comfortably, and still. And
I hope we will, by the way.
And we will, because I really enjoyed talking to you, man.
Wonderful, thank you.
The final question I have, when I'm looking at the way you've structured Cosmonarchy, I cannot help but think of Dota, a game built within a game that rose beyond the game, and that also championed depth and variety. And funky options, and frankly, kind of being in a place where everything is overpowered, so nothing is. Is the way that people often discuss Dota, and I'm getting a similar vibe. But the last thing that I wanted to ask is about modding and map editors more broadly.
Okay.
Because you are striving for someday being able to put out your own original work, which I will be supporting whenever you do.
Thank you.
And in your, as we've been using the term, platonic ideal of a video game, of an RTS game, in 2 minutes, what should a map editor have? What modding support should the game have inbuilt above all else?
Okay, I'm going to give you platonic ideal and then realistic first outing. Platonic Ideal is like, I've always thought that the Platonic Ideal is basically source release as soon as we're no longer supporting the game. When we move on, the community gets access to whatever we can actually source out, open source out. And that could be if we have like libraries that we don't have a license to or whatever, we can't do that. But generally speaking, I don't think we're going to be using proprietary stuff. We're not believers in open source to the degree that like we open source stuff for Cosmonarchy because that just makes sense because contributors might stumble in. Like we open source our modeling pipeline and stuff like that. Open source the main code for the game. I think all code for the game actually. The launcher itself isn't open source, but that's just because not very many people are interested in it right now. And so like maybe that would change in the future. That would be a Veek question. But when it comes to the like idea for open sourcing, that has been such a pain that it's not like Blizzard is still developing the game. Yeah, they remastered it, but even that wasn't them. That was outsourced to another team. And they also broke a lot of things along the way. There's actually new bugs in the remaster that didn't exist in the original game, including a rare but still present issue where the games can just desync silently and you don't even know. So that's a really big one. That does actually happen in Cosmonarchy as well, but we are working to fix that. It's not silent either. You do get a very loud error message. But at the very least, we did that step. So when it comes to the like Platonic Ideal, I would love to be able to say that like once we are no longer supporting the game, like actively developing content for it, then we would love to see what the community can do with an open source thing. And I can't I can't promise that because I don't know what my position will be on it in the future. And I also don't know what Veek's position is on this particular topic now. We used to talk about it and be in agreement. I don't know if we still would be. So that would be something I'd have to conversate. But right now, my personal Platonic Ideal would involve that, which is huge for mod support. I also think that the investment that you put into the map editor is good for you as the designer, as the developer. You like, we aren't going to make like 3 campaigns or whatever and then be done. Like ideally we'll have like 50 campaigns. I see like the campaign statistic for like Age of Empires 2 campaigns, and it's ridiculous. There's so many. Now imagine if there were that many, but they were all like the high quality RTS experiences that I've been sort of evangelizing about on this show so far, and talking about how like, yeah, I want more RTS gameplay in my RTS campaign, and I want less like sideshow stuff, and I want more like emergent gameplay. I want like each mission to maybe take like around 20 to 30 minutes. Maybe there's going to be some quicker ones. Maybe there's definitely going to be some ones that are like an hour-long marathon. I want that kind of content. And so each campaign, if it's 10 maps, would be, I don't know, like 4 to 5 to 6 hours of content on average. And so if you have like 50 of those, you've got so much value prop right there.
Infinite value.
Yep. And so that's one thing. Another thing being, like if the map editor is there for you to use and you've made it versatile and you've made it work with all of the things that you're going to need for an RTS game, Dota and other games have started as RTS maps. Like Bounds is like a way to do like a maze, a timing maze, almost like a puzzle game, but like out of time. That's one that started off in StarCraft 1. Technically, like MOBAs actually started in StarCraft 1 with Aeon of Strife, or Eon of Strife. And so like that's one that eventually turned into Dota in Warcraft 3. Like there's tower defense games got their start in RTS games. Like loads of genres that we now consider fully bespoke, complete to themselves, began as custom content. So, and that was with very minimal tools. So if you're making something that's flexible enough to design all of the things you need to design for a really vast set of well-articulated RTS campaigns, then you are going to get people who are interested in using those tools in ways that you didn't intend for, but are okay with. It's not like we're saying, because I don't like micro missions in my RTS campaigns, people are forbidden from ever making micro missions. No. I will ban micro mission map developers. Nothing like that. So they are free to do all that.
There's dozens of those for free made by passionate fans who love it.
And that's exactly what happened with our UMS content in Cosmonarchy. We've got a couple of people who make custom maps. Like UMS stands for use map settings. I don't think I ever defined that earlier. That's just what we called it because that was the game mode that you played custom maps in StarCraft 1. So arcade maps for StarCraft 2 players or whatever, like custom maps. That user-generated content, which is another big buzzword term, is entirely downstream of users, of community members, not of me. I didn't make any of the UMS maps. I made like a unit tester map for somebody because somebody bountied that. That's it. Like I haven't made any maps other than the unit tester that are in our custom folder for that particular respect. And so And really, that should be like in an informational folder, like an educational folder or something, and not in a UMS folder. But anyway, bottom line is like that's my platonic ideal is making sure we've got our super robust editor because and allowing people to use it for mapping and modding. If they want to make their own version of the game, like the thing is, the realistic first outing is we don't necessarily have source code released just yet. We don't necessarily have a ton of documentation on every feature, how to use every feature in every certain way, because limited team, we need to focus on making a really good product by itself. And so support for other people making other products or other games inside our game is going to be minimal because that's not really the focus. That's not what it's about. And so that's probably the main way that I would describe the difference there is that when it comes to the work that we can do in a platonic ideal world, in a end state world where we have all of the stuff that we've done and we're ready to move on to something else, then the community has we're giving the keys to the kingdom over and like in a way that makes sense. That would be what I would want. I don't want it to be like people have security concerns about open source software. I think you can deal with that. I don't think that's actually a problem. Maybe because we would be the rights holders, we might have like final say in an update that goes through, but we would still be involved to that degree. If we were ever going to completely disconnect the way that like Blizzard is completely disconnected from StarCraft 2, except for one intern who pushes the update button for when the Balance Council comes up with their balance patch updates. And so like, at least that's the meme in StarCraft 2's community. I actually don't know if that's true, but that's basically it. So like, yeah, I hope that answered the question.
No,
we definitely could go. We definitely could go for way longer. I'm glad that we were able to go for as long as we did because, like I was telling you before, who knows when this casting stuff is going down. They actually accelerated it like super fast, and somebody else stepped in for me because I was like, you guys can't just drop that on me. Come on now. So I'm very glad that we go.
No problem. You go run. You go get to what you need to do. But it's been fantastic getting to talk to you, man. I love your work, and I will be following it very intently, and I look forward to having you on the channel again to talk more because like
absolutely
we have barely scratched the surface of discussing Cosmonarchy for one, but more notably design and RTS philosophy.
That's my stuff. That's what I like to talk about, and I don't get to talk about it enough to other people who have thought about it super deeply. I watched some of your series about like the Age of Empires total overhaul stuff. Your comment about the Dark Ages thing, obviously I referenced that earlier, but like people who there's value in pacing, like just to speak on that one, there's value in like pacing out the early game, but if you're doing the same thing almost every time, that is like that's why we start with 6 workers instead of 4. It's not 12 like in StarCraft 2 currently. We still want an early game. You start off with just a little bit more money and a little bit more workers because that accelerates you towards deciding what you're going to do.
It makes
you're making
the tree
impactful
split.
decisions.
Like you're starting to force your decision tree to split. Whereas in Age of Empires 1 Dark Age currently, I know there's nuance. I know there's ways you can make it differently. But overall, it's wildly similar every single fucking game. So yes, getting to the point where you can start making meaningful decisions quicker.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I would say. Is if the decisions aren't meaningful, if they're rote and expected, then if you could replace yourself with any other player, it's the same way I feel about really railroaded single player experiences. If you could replace your experience with that of another player for any amount of time, then there is a degree to which that doesn't need to be you playing it. And then why are you playing it?
Yeah,
so
that's
like
why,
that's what
those sort of like cinematic style missions where they will pretty much play out the same way every fucking time. Take this objective, blah, blah, blah. I don't feel different from anyone else. I would rather watch someone play this on YouTube than do it myself.
Yeah, I can skip through.
Yeah, exactly. I can skip through precisely.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Again,
there's that. There's like I've a totally different experience, but example. But I've been playing Traveler's Rest with my girlfriend recently.
Yeah.
And they have this weird dynamic. It's like an indie game, tavern management thing. They have this weird dynamic in dialogue where they'll give you only one dialogue option, but you must click it, and it's like, why? You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's something that comes to mind, a similar sort of thing. So you can see this kind of design epithet in so many different places. The idea of it not working. Hasn't occurred to a lot of people for some reason. I don't know why. So that's what I'll say about that. I appreciate you having me on. Definitely do want to come back and talk more about like design. Doesn't even have to be a Cosmonarchy centered episode, although I do very much appreciate your kind words and your.
Well, we'll do more Cosmonarchy stuff too, but having you on maybe with some other people like Chumbeke or something to just talk about like RTS design sounds super fucking fun.
Yeah. That would be a little round table or something. Who knows?
Yeah. Totally. I'm going to put that in my notes.
There you go. Appreciate all the people who were in the chat as well, giving us some good talks and all that. I saw Pedro was saying he's gonna check it out just because we have improved selection, multi-building select, better pathing, stuff like that. Listen, the pathing thing, it's not StarCraft 2 pathing. I actually think StarCraft 2 pathing would make it worse as a game because like armies kind of blob, and the fact that they spread out makes army engagements take more effort and thought and like brain power. That's just my thing. That's where I think there's value in jank, right? I was talking about that earlier. So,
Sure.
But it is improved from StarCraft 1. So if you just wanted a little bit of a tweak there, yeah, you can get it.
Jimbeke mentioned. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I know you gotta go. I'm gonna hang about for just a couple more minutes for anyone who's still here. Pronogo, thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure, my friend.
All right. Thank you. I will see you next time.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to get my own camera up, but I'll leave these beautiful screenshots on screen. For everyone who was just here for Pronogo, thank you so much for taking the time to come check us out. If you have even the slightest amount of interest in Age of Empires 2, please do join. It would be great to have you on the channel, and I do intend on talking about RTS design stuff more broadly going forwards. Now, while I am trying to find my fecking video capture, if any of you have questions or comments or thoughts that you'd like to share with me down in the comment section, that would of course be grand. And in the meantime, that will be probably what we do to wrap up the stream. So any other remaining thoughts or questions or similar, please do feel free to fire away. Hello, look at me, I'm all tilty around. I wonder why OBS has done that. All right, let me get my little camera back up. Boom. Hello, friends. Good to see you guys. All right, so other questions, other thoughts, other random topics that you would like me to go over. I did have a couple of things that were submitted to me on Discord. I might touch upon one or two of those and save a bunch for the next stream because we have more stuff in mind. Something I will toss in right now as well is just to be thorough about it. I do have my own game coming out soon on Kickstarter. It's called Enclave. It is a tabletop role-playing game. And so even if you have the slightest interest in TTRPGs, please do check it out. I will throw a link in the description for thoroughness. But yes, if you guys have any other questions for me, either about RTS, the Age franchise stuff I normally talk about, some of the stuff I've learned about Cosmonarchy, anything in between, I would love to hear. The one thing I will start yapping about that someone mentioned wanting to hear about in the Discord, I'll just go through in order of how I received them. I'll do one and see if there's any other questions. It's talking about the Japanese pantheon for Age of Mythology. This was submitted by Diaborn on the Discord. If you were, again, just here for Cosmonarchy, thank you so much for your time. I'd love if you stuck around, but obviously you don't have to if this is not your speed, because the upcoming Japanese Age of Mythology pantheon is, of course, hotly anticipated. It was my number 2 on my predictions list. And a lot of what I think about the Japanese pantheon, a lot of what I predict for it and what I'd like to see is reflected in that video. The thing I would love to see most, first and foremost, with a Japanese pantheon, is I'd really love to see something that played with myth units as a concept more substantively, in that I'd really like the Japanese to have more myth units than any other faction currently in the game, but maybe compensate by having those myth units be slightly weaker or slightly more specialized. I think that would be extremely cool, be a good way of capturing the like wild variety that you find in a lot of Shinto folklore. And beyond that, I think that like it's pretty obvious who they're going to pick, right? For their majors, there's a bunch of minors that are pretty obvious that would be there, like minor gods that would be there as well. One thing I'd be curious to see is whether they go with the samurai ninja shit, right? And like, because obviously that is Sengoku period. That's 1500s, and that would be wildly pushing the AOE or the AOM rather time frame, because right now the AOM time frame is I don't care what any of you say, the Norse are a medieval faction. They are firmly at about 1000 AD, and the Egyptians are at like 2000 BC, give or take. Obviously with some wild anachronisms like war elephants. And so that's like 3,000 years. And then if we have Sengoku period samurai in there as well, it's another 500 years. I think it was smart that they put the Chinese faction they added pretty squarely in like the warring states adjacent period, which is kind of right in the middle. Maybe again more on the medieval side, whereas the Greek faction is more on the classical antiquity side. But yeah, so do I think they will go with the wildly anachronistic medieval stuff? Yes, and I don't think that will be a problem because I do not think Age of Mythology should have a time frame. Even though I've argued very passionately for Age of Empires 2 needing to have a time frame. I think they're different beasts. So that's great. My quick summary on Age of Mythology is I think that it's I'd love to see them differentiated by a focus on myth units. In terms of favor generation, it's going to be something shrine, almost certainly. Bet you anything. But yeah, you can check out that video if you want more information. And fulgurating beans and seeing more modders doing incredible things is encouraging. Exactly. That's why I wanted to have Pronogo on, because I think that his work is not only pretty freaking incredible, but it also is really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in RTS. It is very representative of what I'd love to do with my own work. And also, it is a great litmus test for frankly disproving a lot of the naysaying comments that I get on the reg. If his game can exist with 3 factions with completely unique tech trees, each of which have 50 completely unique units, and sub-factions that differentiate those units even more, then obviously that's feasible, right? You might say, well, it's not to market yet. Sure. But a lot of that is dependent on the marketing of the product rather than the quality of the product itself. And with a good marketing team, I think he's going to do fantastically. That when that is released, I'm going to say when he'd better fucking release that thing, or release his own standalone soon. I would love to see that. But yeah, so it's like I said, it's a litmus test for a lot of what I am discussing on this channel and why I think modding matters and why I think RTS is awesome and why I think there's hope for it. He is breaking conventions, which is, I guess if I had to summarize my channel, it would be breaking RTS conventions. Pedro says, if you're generous, the Norse can be roughly 850 AD. That's true, fully true. But like said, AOM time frame was very flexible from the start. Yeah, I don't think it's the point of the game. In my ideal world, AOM would have a slightly more defined time frame, but also in my ideal world, AOM would have like 20 factions. So each with fully unique tech trees. Yeah, so I think it's wildly doable. And frankly, AOM is kind of in a similar boat of a game with completely independent factions, though admittedly there's a lot more overlap. They'd be way less differentiated from each other than Cosmonarchy factions would, for example. But each AOM faction also has, like 40 to 50 units if you count all the myth units, which you should. And it works. So I still, for those people who say, oh, you need simplicity, you need parsimony, you need to streamline things down because otherwise you're going to lose people. I don't agree. I think there is a place for those things, but they are not the be-all, end-all. And I think that those sort of sensibilities have frankly kind of dominated RTS for quite a while. And you can say, well, what about the games you just gave as exceptions? Well, again, I don't think they take it far enough. And I think games like Cosmonarchy show that there is appetite and room for those games in the space. Man, it would be fun to do a gamed RTS design roundtable like we were talking about. I think that would be sick. What do you guys think? I'll do one more question, then we'll wrap up for the day. If you guys, again, have stuff in chat, please throw it in, but I'll take one other from my little to-do list. Possible rollbacks or changes for the largely unpopular 3K civs, as in, how could they be better integrated or turned into something more palatable? Apologies, I don't remember who posted this one. But thank you for whoever did on the Discord. I think that this has been discussed by people who know the history much better than me. Tyranno has done so. I talked about it in my 3K debacle video. And I think that it comes down to, it's so funny, I think that the Japanese pushing the AOM time frame is fine, if not good. Whereas I think that the 3K civs pushing the AOE2 time frame is bad. It might seem weird and arbitrary, but I do think it's because of the natures of the beasts and the differentiations that they bring. Though I will clarify, by the way, seeing the Japanese set as like Yamato period Japanese would be so cool. That would be awesome. They're not going to do it, but it would be awesome because people want samurai and all that shit, right? But pardon me. So for 3K civs, I don't think they're going to do anything about it. if I'm being perfectly honest. I think that the problems have been presented. I think the options have been presented. And I very sincerely doubt anything is going to change now. I'd be very curious to see the sales numbers. Because if they're like, oh, no, sold great, sold awesome, sold better than any other DLC in proportion to our current active player base, I'd be like, okay, well, I suppose I am truly in the minority here. That is something I totally could embrace. But I still think it's wrong. I still think it's a bad thing to have done, and it will be bad for the game going forwards. In terms of rollbacks or changes I would make, I kind of think it's too late for that. I think that, if they're going to make their bed, may as well lie in it. And that's part of the reason that I'm looking elsewhere, frankly. It's why I'm working on the Total Overhaul series. It's why I'm talking to Pronogo and people who work on other games. Because I feel like Age of Empires is not a game that I am as interested in anymore. And to the degree that I am, I have a very specific slice of things that I want out of it. I do still intend on making my more conventional content on this channel, albeit at a slower rate, as you guys have no doubt noticed. And there are still projects in the works that I think will be fun for the people who want that particular itch scratched. But I think that I've kind of said my piece with Age of Empires. And anything else will be kind of masturbatory more than anything else. I think it's much more useful for me personally to use Age of Empires and the lessons it has taught us and the wonderful memories it has provided as a jumping off point into something unique and something different. And using it as a platform to create that. Hence Total Overhaul, hence modding focus. But yeah, that is purely my opinion, though. People, and I will always have a wild amount of fondness in my heart for Age of Empires. Not to mention the fact that I still intend on creating content for it, so it's not like I'm going anywhere anytime soon. Helios says, wish I had a microphone with you. Oh, that would be cool. Maybe sometime. Simplicity versus complexity, no. It's actually simple to control, complex under the hood. I actually fully agree with this. It's something that I think I've talked about in my Total Overhaul series with movement, is you want movement that is immediately intuitive. You know what's going on. You're like, oh, yep, I know what to do. But then as you start to explore it more, you realize, holy shit, there's so much more to this than there looked like. As long as the player isn't expected to memorize or learn things in order to kind of access the game at its most basic functionality, it's good. As soon as you make people do homework, that's a freaking problem. That's where complexity can be a problem. Frankly, that's kind of my problem with Total War, for the record, is I think Total War, if you were just like, all right, I'm booting up in a game of Total War and I'm going to see what happens, I think you're going to have a rough time. Maybe in some Total War games that's an exception. I had a rough time doing that, my first time playing Total War. It was only once I learned the game and kind of learned the principles that I was able to have fun with it. I think you should be able to have fun with the game even if you don't understand it. And that's, I think, the simplicity versus complexity. You're right, simplicity versus complexity is too simplistic. But complexity under the hood, I think, is virtually always neutral to positive. So long as it's base accessible. StarCraft and Warcraft and even Roblox created a lot of genres. Cat versus Mass Income Wars, as Helios would say. Helios follows up. Haven't kept up with AoE and Empire Earth mods in forever. What has been done with them? Oh Lord, man, it's been a lot. Check out some of the videos on my channel. I think one of the best places to start if you're interested in the modding scene would be my recent video talking about the issues with modding, but also some of the game's triumphs, like my documentaries about the Empire Craft mod could be a great point of crossover, as well as the Portuguese Civ mod, the PCM. Pedro says, I face it like Magic the Gathering. It doesn't matter. That sold more in pre-sale than everything else ever. Stuff beyond the fantasy of the game just kill the hype for me. Bingo! If you guys want to hear me whinge about Magic the Gathering at some point, I absolutely wish to do so. Friend of the channel and friend of me, Chimbeke, is in a similar boat with Magic the Gathering, and we've talked about having a bitching stream where we can just complain about it. Full grading Bean says, once a game is out there, it belongs to the players. We can make great things with the game as a starting point. Yeah, I agree. And while the players like the dev's vision, awesome. If the players no longer like the dev's vision, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. We can be different. Helios says that's more of a thematic trademark thing. You won't eat a burger unless it's from McDonald's. You won't play that species unless it's insects or a specific nation like the Egyptians. Devs could simply change the graphics and label. Sometimes you got Egyptian Zerg, Egyptian Protoss. You won't play Empire Earth unless it's only T4 endgame because you only like the endgame. So I'd say that the aesthetic behind the game is wildly important, though. The aesthetic behind the game will be a big part of the appeal to a certain subset of players. And I think that those players are not only important, but they are part of the player base that keeps the game alive. The lore hounds, the mod makers, the custom map only people, the campaign only people, the single player goofing around people. Those are incredibly strong contingents that need to be addressed, and I would argue need to be appealed to. I would even argue they need to be appealed to far more than a professional scene. Though I think that a robust multiplayer is very important. And a pro scene is cool. Don't get me wrong. I love pro scenes. I think they're awesome. That's how I got back into Age of Empires too. Pedro says early Total War didn't require much out-of-game learning. I've never played them. Shogun 2. I played that one, and that one was admittedly my favorite Total War. But yeah, Rome 1, Medieval 2, I'd love to play those. They seem sick. Shogun 2 felt much more intuitive than a lot of the other games that I've played in the Total War franchise, and I think it's because it was more immediately accessible, and then to get good, I had to learn. But to play the game, I didn't have to learn. Yeah, that's why it blown out. Yeah. Empire Earth mentioned. Oh yeah, I've talked about Empire Earth a few times on this channel. Empire Earth is a game that I find to be just wildly goofy, but also kind of awesome. Like, there are certain things about Empire Earth I think are fantastic, and a lot of things about it I think are stupid. Like, stupid and jank. But the things that it does amazingly, I will never take away from it. It has a system that I'd like to talk about in a video at some point because I love it. Rob, you still want why Empire Earth actually sucks? How AoE 1 can improve. Do you really want to see that? All right, I'll put him in. Empire Earth 1 does suck, but is also awesome. Like, I guess that's a good clickbait title. Empire Earth 1 sucks, but is also awesome. Oh, God. Also awesome. I will try my best to fulfill that. And then also AoE 1. I do intend to do a video about AoE 1. I might have mixed, but you got my point. Sure, of course, yeah. AoE 1 also sucked. But it was revolutionary, but it sucked. It was a stepping off point. In before the Vietnamese mafia targets me. Any final questions or thoughts for you guys before we round it off for today? It's been a pleasure talking. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I hope you've enjoyed this somewhat atypical stream setup where we've had a guest on for like the entire time rather than just at the end. It's been awesome having you in chat. It's been awesome having new people from the Cosmonarchy scene. You got a great game going on, and I look forward to seeing it thrive and succeed because it's fantastic stuff. All right, we'll wrap it up there. I say the only other thing I would say is, once again, be sure to check out Cosmonarchy. Be sure to join their Discord, download it. Again, it's entirely free. You get everything you need through a one-click download. The Discord can provide you support, as can their email address and similar if you're having any issues whatsoever. And Pronago has messaged me to say, please give a shout out to Chumbeke as well. Yes, indeed, Chumbeke, you are the best. We love you. Chumbeke is the reason I met Pronago in the first place, because he mentioned Pronago on the last stream we did that I had him on. So thanks a lot, Chumbeke. You're a great guy and a fantastic creator. And to all of you who are watching, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope this has been interesting. More content to come. I got another video scheduled this month and a monster video coming out next month. But until then, my name is Ryan.